What is up, everyone? Welcome to another edition to the Rated G podcast. I am your host, G Terado. For those of you who are new here, welcome to the show. This is the podcast where I talk all things art and creativity, as well as other things that are happening in life. And I often sit down with fellow artists and creatives to help promote their brand, their art, their business, while getting to know each other more. So if you enjoy this type of content, please hit that like button, follow if you're listening, subscribe if you're watching, ring the notification bell, that way you can keep up with the uploads, and hit up the comment section if you have any comments or questions that I could answer. Yeah, all these social media links will be provided below if you want to follow me or my guest on social media. Now, again, if you are, and for those who are regular or frequent audience members, welcome back and thank you for your continued support. Now, going back to those who are new here, I just want to give you a heads up. This episode 183 is actually part 2 of the previous episode with my guest Alistaire McKemy, who is a therapist by day and an artist by night. And the first half, the whole episode entirely was like 4 hours, a little over 4 hours. So I had to split it into 2 parts. So that's why we are here today with the second half. So that being said, if you are brand new to this channel, to this podcast, I would I would advise you to check out the previous episode 182 just to catch the beginning of that. And and I'll give you a heads up. It's pretty heavy on the mental health aspect. This even this half we still talk about mental health and therapy, and then we start getting into Alistaire's artwork and how he got into it, how we met on the market scene and all that good jazz. So yeah, without further ado, let's get back to that show. Oh, that felt so good.
Deep relief.
Oh, I feel like I have no ballast anymore.
Float away.
All right, so here's the thing, and I've talked about this on the podcast, mostly solo podcasts. So it'd be nice to like hear a third party on this part, because besides me just talking to the air, I have this. I usually confront Nicole about this quite a few times, but all right. Let me preface with this, right? She's very supportive of my business. I mean, especially her being the breadwinner in our marriage. So there are times where she helps me out financially for my business, and I do my best to try to avoid that. But there's like other aspects of that support that I feel like I need sometimes that she doesn't quite, hit that mark yet. And it's really just like it's social media stuff, unfortunately. So like, I sometimes will envy when I see fellow artists who have partners that like regularly promote their art, right? They're always liking their content, it's just all like, like courtesy likes, and they just share their stuff in their stories. Now, Nicole's like super awesome, so I don't want anyone like tuning in thinking like Nicole's a bad person. She's fucking awesome. Like she's too good for me, quite honestly. But like in this aspect, it's like the thing I wish she was a little more active on was, like just sharing my work, because like quite on like I wanna try to build clients for commissions. And and sometimes she'll bring up how like some of her coworkers or whatever might be interested in commissioning art, whatever. So I'm like, all right, so there are people on her side of connections that like might be interested in my work. So anyway, sorry, I'm long-winded. So oftentimes I won't feel, even though again she does support me financially,
Hmm.
um, but I sometimes won't feel supported because of the lack of her engagement on my content,
Hmm.
and like, just share, like she's becoming better, but it used to be really bad a while back. But yeah, and she wouldn't like share things in her stories, like she wouldn't repost my stuff. And I guess like I get upset about it because I see and watch her like doom scrolling on her phone. So like, me, because I'm more, I'm more active on social media, promoting, marketing,
Hmm.
all, doing all the stuff. So I'm like, it's only a few taps. Like it doesn't take a lot to like, hey, hit the heart. Oh, geez. I mean, she's better about it now, but I used to really get on top of her about it because she really wasn't doing that much. Like it got to the point where I set an alarm on her phone. It was like every Wednesday night, share something. It would just say share something. But like so I was like, I would try to articulate to her, but I'm like, like I appreciate the financial support, but there is like this other type of support that I feel I need from you, just to maybe it is validation, like maybe it will show that she does like believe in like the thing I'm working on, and
Okay, so I'm gonna hop in here because you said it. I've been listening, and you said it sideways when I asked the direct question. What is the story that you're telling yourself about the meaning of her sharing or not sharing your art?
all right, I'm afraid to get
What is the story that you are telling yourself
that she
about
doesn't
what it
support my business by not sharing my content.
and it is that the story? So is that like
It
is
kind of
that what's at the
it,
root of that?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, a little bit, yeah.
Do you feel that that's true? Or do you feel that that is an insecurity that tells you it's true? I don't know this because I'm not in your marriage. So
Of
like
course, no, of
that's why
course.
I get to ask these questions.
I'm trying to be. I want to answer this
Yeah.
as accurately and like as honestly as possible. So that's why I'm like
Yeah.
like
No,
I'm
take your time, man.
stammering. But I feel like it's both. Um, because like she's not, again, she does doom scroll, but she's not very, she's not very keen on like how social media actually works.
Mhm.
So like I do have an understanding that like that's all she does is just scroll and stuff, and if she likes something, she'll like it. But and I'm like I will totally admit that like I am a jealous type too. So when I see, again, like I said in the beginning, when I see colleagues of mine that get that sort of support from their partners, and I'm like, ah, man, I find myself like, I wish Nicole would do that. you know but I am aware, like I do believe she does support me, and
Mhm.
she does, and she's like, been vocal about it too, especially like I'll hear her talk about it with her family and stuff.
Mhm.
But it's just like, I don't know, it could be like, it could be a series of things that lead up to that too. um, like I'll admit that I could be having a bad day before that interaction,
Mhm.
and for whatever reason, there are certain things or certain posts I see that like kind of trigger like, oh, I don't feel that with Nicole. And then it turns into like, you don't share my stuff, you don't like my stuff, you don't, So again,
That's
I'm
giving an
like,
out for some kind of insecurity that lives inside of you, and that's just the mask that it's choosing to wear at that point. And the general guidance that I'll give you with this, or really with anything else, a really important question to ask yourself is, what is this in service of? What does this protect me from? Because
okay,
this is it's a hard kind of paradigm shift for a lot of people to make, but once you make it, my God, do things get not easier, but more understandable.
yeah,
Everything that we do, even if on the surface it doesn't look like it is of service, like self sabotage is the most obvious thing, right? Self sabotage is actually self service. Okay. And people make the mistake of things are only to service or of service if they are good. And that's a false dichotomy. Not all medicine is sweet. A lot of it is actually quite bitter. Okay. Um,
So,
I was going somewhere. The ADHD's dropped off. Walk me back like 5 seconds in that conversation. I'll
well,
pick
you
up the
asked me
passion.
like, how does this serve me?
Yes. Okay. So see, I just needed the trains right back on the track. So when we
I'm
think
so
about
proud of
things,
myself for remembering that too, because my mind is always like,
you did it, man. So when we add that paradigm of how is this in service or how is this in protection, if we look at self-sabotage, say that there's somebody who is up for a promotion, right, and they're pretty much a shoe-in, but right before they're going up for this review for this promotion, they decide to go on a drinking bender, turn a report in late, don't show up to a board meeting, and then are forced to not be able to get that promotion because they showed their ass. Most people would look at that and say, well, self-sabotage didn't help at all because it didn't help that person get that promotion. And to that I say lovingly, you are wrong.
mm,
That was an act of self-preservation because that person was afraid of what was going to happen to them when they got that promotion. Circumstances were going to change emotionally, physically, the work environment, all of that, beyond a point that that person felt capable of managing and feeling safe in. So instead of moving into something that was dangerous and a threat to the known, they did what they could to stay where they are to keep them safe because the promotion was a threat. If we're willing to look at the gnarlier aspects of who we are, the parts that tell us to tell other people to go fuck themselves, or whatever that might be, if we're willing to look at those parts and say, okay, well, how does this actually protect me? How does this serve me? That opens up a different conversation. And again, part of this is probably just a byproduct of my work, but at this point, G, I have learned that if there is something that you want to understand either about yourself or other people, you cannot blame or shame your way into it.
mm,
You love your way into it. There's no amount of harassing, haranguing, cajoling other people,
mm,
right? That's really gonna make a difference. It's not. We like to say that it will, but it doesn't.
mm.
So for that, I think it's good that you've identified that story, that there's some insecurity there, and I think that that would be something for y'all to sort of look at.
Insecurity is like is such a like key narrative in our marriage because she's the successful one in our marriage, and I've always,
And from the gender dynamic perspective, like
yeah,
that's from a Western cultural perspective, that's difficult for most men
yeah,
because there's this idea that we are supposed to be the primary financial, breadwinners. We're supposed to be providers in that context, and this could be a whole other episode. My
yeah,
my personal diatribe is that healthy masculinity is about service. It's not
yeah,
about subjugation. And service isn't just provision in terms of financial provision, because I think that as men, we are also victims of patriarchy. Yes, this is a system that we benefit from, but it also leads to, extremely high rates of suicide among men because they don't talk about their feelings because we're told that that makes you a girl. Like there's all of this. I heard it beautifully in a documentary that said when something is defined by what it is not, by what it rejects, how sorry, there's a loud muffler.
that's fine. I heard you.
um, how like if something is only ever defined by what it rejects, how could it ever be positive? So
Mm,
masculinity is defined by its rejection of femininity. It's not defined by any positive qualities within masculinity itself. It's based off of rejection of the feminine. And when you have a negative definition of yourself based off of what you are refusing to allow in your orbit because that's not you,
yeah,
that creates an angry kind of cesspool for some weird shit to sneak in.
yeah.
Am I wrong?
Oh, you're not wrong at all. Uh, no, you're totally right. Because there's a lot of other things that fuel into the insecurity. It's everything that you said. Um, the whole just the patriarchy that me, Nicole being the provider instead of the man and all this stuff. But yeah, so I mean, yeah, you're right on the head on that. Um, but like, again, I just always try to say like I'm always try to be um I'm always trying to be like open to like admitting if I'm like in the wrong about something or, whatever.
Are
So,
you willing to admit when you're wrong because it looks good? Or are you willing to admit you're wrong because you know you're wrong?
uh,
It's okay because
no,
realistically, the answer is a little bit of both.
I'm just saying because like sometimes like it doesn't hit me till like after, you know what I
Hmm.
mean? So it's like, um, so sometimes it'll hit me later if I'm like, oh, you fucked up here, you know. But like when it happens, I admit it for sure.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, like anytime I admit when I'm wrong about something, like no, I fucked up. Like I don't just say it for word pleasure. I'm like, no, I fucked up, and like goddamn, I wish I caught it sooner. Like that's usually kind of like my reaction when I do mess up. It's like, fuck, I wish I caught that sooner, but it's just like that's just part of the journey of like growing, I guess. Um,
Cultivating
but
that
yeah,
awareness of, what do you want to do the next time that presents itself?
yeah,
Because life is cyclical and thematic. It is an iterative process, right? In the sense of it stays more or less the same, but we have these different, fractal like permutations that come off of things. I personally believe that there's only one problem. The tear pattern on it is just slightly different person to person, however you want to define that. And so for you, if you're noticing that there are these themes in the relationship around whether it's, the insecurity or the support or communication or anything like that, knowing that that's a theme doesn't mean that you get to go, oh, fuck, right, this is what I'm struggling with for like the rest of my days. It's understanding that as you progress through, whatever iteration or manifestation of that is showing itself to you, that's preparing you for the next time that it shows up.
yes, I'm so glad you beat me to it because I was gonna say that. I was like, because again, this happens every once in a while, not as frequent as it used to. It wasn't until I really vocalized sort of like how I felt about it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I am that's like the thing I'm striving to is like being able to catch it as it starts. Obviously I would love to catch it before it manifests, but I can sort of see it when it's starting to really manifest itself. I'm like, just remember, like I start going through my Rolodex of like, remember, like she does support you.
Mm-hmm.
Like I try to remember the things that we talked about and like try to understand, like, yeah, she's not like social media savvy. She just knows how to scroll through things. Like she's not, and it's super rare when she does post things in her stories, even just for herself. So
Mm-hmm.
like I go through like all of these thoughts before I like, before I blow up, because like it is unfortunately it's like part of my nature to like bottle things up. Well, maybe that's just like the whole, toxic masculinity thing, but
Part of it. I mean, that's being by virtue of being a man in this country. That absolutely is part of it.
yeah.
And I think there's also this is a broader statement for everybody. We're all guilty of going to dry wells and trying to pull up buckets of water and then blaming ourselves when we pull up dust. And the reality is that we're going to a source that's never given us what we wanted or what we needed, right? That could be a partner, that could be a parent, that could be a colleague, that could be a boss, that could be anything. We keep going to people who historically have demonstrated in one way or another that they don't want to, they're not capable, whatever, pick one to meet the need, right? They're not equipped, they don't want to, they can't, whatever, it doesn't matter, they can't meet the need.
Yeah.
The choice then returns to us of, are we going to continue to go to this dry well hoping that there's going to be something different about today where we pull up wonderful luscious water, we perform a miracle. Like are we going to keep doing that process of hoping for something unrealistic, or are we going to recognize this is not capable of meeting the need?
Mm.
And the hardest part that I think, especially when it comes to relationships of all variety, lowercase r, so not just romantic, but platonic, familial, work, all the above. Most people, spoiler alert, they're looking for a parent. They're not looking for a partner. They're not looking for a friend. They're not looking for a colleague. Most people's base emotional literacy is they want a lack of boundaried connection with another person who is going to receive them regardless of how they show up.
Mm.
Parents, therapists, and dogs are the only three people that you're really going to get that from, right? I'm talking about unconditional positive regard. And so when we're going to relationships, especially, I see this outside of relationships. The second relationship I see this with most often is friendships. We want somebody that's going to be in our corner no matter what, like your homeboy that you were having to defend yourself to. Like we want people to, be there for us and basically not miss a tune. And that's not realistic. Like, I'm a therapist, and I assure you, I have stuck my foot in my mouth squarely in session before. It happens because I'm a person. We're all people. We are all going to make mistakes. We're all going to have misattunements. The contradictory experience that I provide for clients when that happens is that I'm going to be curious. And I've had clients come and be like, well, I felt this way, or I felt like you were mad at me, or I felt like it was this. And I'll be like, please tell me more. I'm not immediately rushing to a place of defensiveness of like, no, you can't say this about me, or that's wrong, or trying to, control their experience. I'm like, no, tell me more. Tell me how we got here. Let's work this out. Let's be curious about this. And when we're able to meet things with curiosity instead of judgment, that also opens up a lot of doors of perspective, right? Because if you're being genuinely curious about something, you can't arrive at a foregone conclusion. You're actually staying open to what's there. So going back to that relational aspect, learning to love people within the lanes of which they are capable of showing up for us is one of the greatest gifts that we can ever give ourselves. There are going to be some people that will be that social media poster for you, that will be that hype person that's going to like repost like within like 2 minutes of everything that you post is going to be up there. Yeah. And there are some people who aren't that, but they're going to come see you at every show, and they're going to make sure that, they get a picture with you when they buy your art. Trying to expect everything from one person, again, whether it's a partner, a friend, or anybody, wanting them to be all things really sets everybody up for failure. Said another way, if you put somebody on a pedestal, all they can do is fall. So being realistic with ourselves about, is this a need that this person can realistically meet? Is this something that they've demonstrated, historically that they can or can't? Is it reasonable and realistic for me to be asking for this based off of this behavior? Because here's the thing, what most people want isn't unreasonable or unrealistic. It's not unrealistic to want their partner to support them, right? Yeah. If your partner is historically demonstrated that, like, I see this with like old Southern couples where like the wife goes to church, but the husband doesn't. Okay. Like, it's that he's not capable of showing up and supporting her in that ways. Like the husband that doesn't go to church. There are other women that she's able to have that community with, but it's this idea that one person's supposed to meet all of these needs, and that's not realistic. So the husband might not go to church and might not, share those same religious and moral values, but there's a sense of community with the people that do. And instead of problematizing that within the marriage of you don't share these values, or you're not willing to do this thing, the person gets that need met elsewhere. They have that community within that religious space with other people that share it. So a long diatribe way of saying, recognizing, are people realistically capable of meeting the need? Wanting somebody to take an interest in who you are and what you do, not unrealistic. Based off of who they've demonstrated themselves to be through actions and just who they are as a person, is that now a realistic ask? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was eloquently said, my friend.
Thank you. At some point I've joked about doing a podcast and calling it "Shit Your Therapist Says."
That'd be great, dude.
Just because I think that one of the, again, I don't, at the risk of sounding self-aggrandizing here, I think one of the things that makes me good at what I do, like I said before, is that I'm a person, right? Like, I don't, as best I can, I try not to put on airs about anything that I've been through, learned, whatever, because I think that, being a person and being real and being authentic and showing up and being vulnerable, I think that that's how real interpersonal connection happens. So for me to sit here with you and have this conversation, like, I know there's the concern for you that like, this is a therapy session, man, this is how I've been talking like forever. Like, I will admit, I knew a lot walking into grad school. Like, spoiler alert, 80% of being a therapist is being a good person. And I know good's a really subjective term, but for me, it's the ability to deprioritize yourself and hold space for other people, right? It's not about prioritizing your emotional experience, but it's about being curious about other people's. A friend of mine also sent me a TikTok that was like, hey, so a form of autism is special interest in people. And I'm like, oh God, is this my special interest? Is it people? Is that why I'm a therapist? Just because I've always been fascinated with, other people's experiences. And so for me to, sit across from you and hear about your life, you're doing me the favor in this equation, right? Because I'm always in my experience. I know what I'm thinking. I know what I'm feeling. I know the ways that I navigate the world, but to put on somebody else's head for a little bit and figure out what it's like to be them, even though I'm never going to truly understand that in the same way that I understand my own experience, through that process of trying to step away from myself and trying to immerse myself in someone else, I learn a lot about me and I learn a lot about other people.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. That's powerful, and I totally resonate with that because well, first let me say I'm relieved that you are enjoying this because it allows you to get into my head because like I've had podcasts with other guests where I felt like I was pouring all this shit on them where I'm like, oh, we should be talking about your art, which we are going to be talking about your art. But like
Now, listen, as the more material you got, the better, right? That's the way I look at it. The more you got to work with out of this, the more value I can give you, the better I'm going to feel about all this.
I'm loving this sincerely. But no, there have been I've had guests I've had podcasts with other guests. I'm like, fuck, I think like I felt bad for putting them in this situation where they had to hear my shit, where I'd bring them back on. So then I'll be like, yeah, let's talk more about your art. Because we spent like 90 minutes talking about my shit where we didn't really get to shine the light on, on the person. So but also what you're saying, like I've preached about this all the time, and it's actually one of the essential reasons why I carry on with this podcast because I do believe that the more people I talk to, as I'm learning about them as a person, I'm also learning more about myself. So I've always like considered this as talk therapy, um, and yeah, just like overall educational. So like for you to say that, I was like, yeah, that's exactly that's exactly why I partially do this because I am learning so much about the person in front of me as well as myself. Especially when I'm reviewing the footage and I'm like, like I'll catch myself saying something and I'm like, huh.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm happy to hear that we're on the same page on that regard. Um,
Yeah, this is how
let
I'd be talking to you if we were sitting at the bar. Like this, like straight up, this is the same conversation we would be having. And to your point, it's Alan Watts talks about triangulation, but I call it contextualization. Triangulation is a term used clinically, like in mental health. If somebody throws out triangulation, it's when one person recruits another person to talk about a third person. So it makes that triangle. So it's one person talking to another person, trying to get them to align against a third person. Triangulation, in a mathematical sense, is you're trying to figure out where you are located based off of other points of information, right? So the problem that a lot of people run into in life, and I see this as a person who is a professional sitter with people, folks don't understand that we live in a contextually based reality. Okay, you cannot know what something is without also knowing what it is not. Said another way, you could not take the moral high ground with somebody unless there was a change in topography. I cannot know what I think, feel, and believe unless somebody thinks, feels, and believes the opposite. And we can't know the heights to which human love, empathy, and compassion can soar without also knowing and comprehending the depths of depravity and despair to which they can descend. We
Mm-hmm.
cannot know how amazing humans can be in times of crisis without a crisis. And that's not me saying that I have some, Zen worldview where I am totally okay with genocide or famine or natural disasters or anything like that. There's a certain, and this might sort of resonate for you in the Bruce Lee vein of, you have to have a certain amount of appreciation for your enemy, because without your enemy, how would you know like who you are,
Yeah.
what you stand for? That doesn't mean that you love them in the sense of you welcome them into your home and all this kind of stuff, but that opposition, resistance, obstacles all give us points of definition and clarity, where
Mm-hmm.
we get to figure out, who are we, through this process? How are we going to show up? What are the decisions that we're going to make?
Yeah. Dude, no. Fuck, man. That's heavy. Yeah, I totally resonate with that. And it's why I'm not big into team sports, but I am quite a fan of combat sports, particularly UFC, because of that very reason. Like when there's good sportsmanship between two fighters,
It's a fantastic fight.
I mean, like you often will hear them say, "Oh, thank you so and so for taking this fight with me," because they learn more about themselves as a fighter.
Mm-hmm.
They learn what they can take, what they can endure. and they take each other into deep waters and they see who comes out as the victor. Like you learn so much whether you're winning or losing. I mean, you
Mm-hmm.
learn more when you lose. It's kind of sort of like when you're, with somebody that's against you. Like you learn something from that. And yeah, dude, that's some heavy shit. And like regarding contextualization, is that a
Yeah,
word?
you got it. Yeah.
Um, I wish, not that I want to like get into this, but I
Mm-hmm.
wish with some of the people that I've had some discourses with were considerate of that. Because again, not going to get into it. Some people have been slandering my name, which had led to ostracization.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just like if if some people just knew the context, they would understand more of my character because like they're pretty much character assassinating me based
Mm-hmm.
off of something that they didn't have the full context of, or it was also just a misunderstanding too, but again they need
Mm-hmm.
context in order to know where I'm coming from. But because of the lack of that, here we are. But anyway, that's a whole nother that's something you and I can talk about over a drink if you like.
Well, and to your point within that, it demonstrates the importance of context, but the almost complete disconnect that we have from it, right? I mean, like, look at campaign season. It's acontextual sound bites pulled from all different kinds of stuff and just thrown into a campaign. Like, that's the lowest thing that I can think of, like, in terms
Yeah,
of just the easiest fruit to grab for an example of that. Like,
yeah,
and the other thing that I see pretty consistently, both in my work and then also just as a human navigating the world, is that people want acontextual results without contextual work. Now, again, I'm not universalizing this because sometimes there are barriers in the way of doing the work. Like, to intersectualize and contextualize it, entrepreneurship. If you're somebody that's poor, you have maybe 0 to 1 shots at starting a small business, right? If you're middle class and or attached to somebody that has an income that can support you, realistically, you're looking at 2 to 4 chances at a business.
yeah,
If you are someone that comes from established legacy wealth, 3+. Like, you can keep throwing those darts until you hit the bullseye because
yeah,
you have the resources to be able to do it.
yeah.
And I'm sure you've done business reading for yourself, most people fail multiple times before they succeed.
Mm-hmm.
So again, it's that wanting the acontextual results of success without the contextual work of failure. And again, the importance of that word. And some people can't afford the contextual failure or the contextual work that it takes to get those contextual results. So
Right.
that's why you can't universalize everything. It's about contextualizing. But I see this where, folks will come to me and say, I want a complete 180 turn from my life that I'm currently living. And I'm like, okay, well, what are you willing to do to change that?
Mm,
Would you be surprised at how often people don't want to do anything? They just want stuff to be different.
yeah, sure.
And, I have to lovingly let people rock that out with themselves because the two things can be true. Change takes time and it is available to us at any given moment. It really is about self selection. And that's why when I work with people, it's not about getting people to make these huge, massive, sudden, abrupt life changes. Because, spoiler alert, that shit never ends well. That's why New Year's resolutions are bunk. It's too much, too soon, too quickly. People are creatures of habit, horrendously so, and they
Yeah,
severely, severely discount this within themselves. Right.
yeah.
So if we're able to get people to make even a 1 to 2% difference in their response, right? That adds up over
Yeah.
time. But that requires that willingness to say, okay, I feel the thing. This is the thing. Historically, when this thing happens, this is what I've chosen to do. And these are the things that came out of that.
Mm,
If I can wait 5 more seconds before I say the thing, or if I can insert whatever you're doing, that's just a small percentage of a pivot away from what it is that you've been doing historically that doesn't work for you, those small pivots add up to really big changes.
mm-hmm.
Most people, I find, are very rarely willing to engage in the process of humbling themselves to the extent that they need to in order to start where they need to. And what I mean by that is that there are some people that are not willing to admit that they cannot wash a sink full of dishes. They can only wash a dish at a time.
Mm.
They are not willing to humble themselves to the fact that they have to settle for doing a dish, 2 pieces of silverware, trying to force that as I have to get this whole sink load of dishes done when clearly you can't, because that's why the sink is full.
Yeah.
People don't want to humble themselves to themselves. They don't want to own up to sometimes how bad it really is. And, I just have to love people through that.
Yeah.
People have to come to that felt sense experiential moment of, oh, wow, I'm doing this to me on a certain level.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and taking accountability for that. It's not about saying you are to blame for every single bad thing that's happened in your life. No, because again, I can hear people in the far reaches of the internet, victim, but no. And that being said, one of the most difficult conversations that I have with people is the fact that their trauma is over. For most folks, barring you still being in a traumatizing, situation where, if you're a child stuck at home with parents, or if you're, in a violent situation with like a relationship or something like that, most people's historical trauma is over.
Mm.
What happens when we're traumatized is that pieces of us are flash frozen in that moment. Okay. And they're stuck there. And my personal definition of trauma is a chronic exertion of a previous experience on the present moment, making it so we're never actually dealing with things as they are. Mm. Because what's happening is that something that resembles what formed that traumatized part in us, we see those what look like storm clouds bring. We're like, oh, it's going to be that like F5 cyclone or whatever that blew through here the last time. Like we start telling ourselves the story, but it's not at all. But because that part gets activated and it's hijacked, that part doesn't know that that moment is over. That part's back to respond because it thinks it's happening again. Mm-hmm. And not even letting go, because I hate that phrase, releasing the timeliness of these things, meaning the immediacy of it, the feeling of it, that's a huge battle for a lot of people, because most folks, this is a part of that hard conversation, most people are never going to get justice, for the things that were done to them. They're not. The person that perpetrated against them is not going to apologize, is most likely not going to be held accountable. Like, people aren't going to get justice in a identifiable external way most of the time. And there is a fuck ton of grief in that needs to be witnessed and observed and respected. Okay. I'm never expecting anybody to just be okay with that. The problem that people make for themselves is that when they keep their eyes on what I call the pain prize, or, all these really bad things that have happened to them, and they define themselves by that, it's an illusory or a make-believe process, right? Where people are saying to themselves, consciously and unconsciously, if I stop looking at this painful thing that happened, then it means it's okay that it happened. If I stop focusing on this really negative thing, then it's okay that it happened, and these people are going to get away with it, and it's fine that this happened to me. And the reality is that most trauma survivors have had really great moments in their life post-trauma where their trauma was not the first thing that was on their mind. That was not, a present experience. That was nowhere in their consciousness. Mm-hmm. It didn't suddenly evaporate. It didn't mean that it never happened. And it also didn't mean that their life, was now spiraling out of control. It's this insecure belief that we have to hang on to the pain, and that someone has to be held accountable, and that we have to get that external justice before there can be that resolution. And the jagged horse pill that we have to swallow when it comes to these things is that no, most of the time we are not going to get the justice that we want, need, and deserve in these kinds of situations. When we predicate our healing on an apology that will never come, what do you do? And that's why I really dissuade people from waiting for that, because if you predicate your ability to heal and to recover from something on something outside of you, it will never happen. Those are goalposts that are forever moving. And that's how you keep sticking a stick in your own spokes, right? You keep getting in your own way, because by hanging on to something that's not happening anymore, but saying that it is, we're not actually being here. We're not being authentic us. We're trying to rectify a past incident where the moment of intervention has passed. And I say that with, I know I'm laughing in my voice, but I say that with real love and pain, because I know that on a personal level. Like I've had to walk that trail myself, of knowing that there are some horrible things that I have been through that are not going to see the light of day, that people are not going to be held accountable for. And I have to figure out how to live with that. you know. And that's how I go back to Dr. Frankel's. He says that there's an unlimited amount of constraint that can be placed on choice, but choice itself cannot be taken from us.
Mm.
This is a man that was put in an internment camp, a Nazi internment camp, and then was like, okay, I can either bitch about my day or I can be appreciative of the fact that I'm having a hot shower.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
He
that's
didn't choose being in an internment camp. People don't choose their abuse. They don't choose the violence that's perpetrated against them. You do get to choose the story that you tell yourself about what happened.
yeah.
And there are people who will understandably and justifiably say, I was a victim, I was victimized, and this is who I am. And there are other people that are capable of looking at really horrible life events and saying that had nothing to do with me as a person. I was a projection screen for somebody else's violence, and it really had nothing to do with me.
Mm.
Which is also scary for people to accept, because there's a lot of personalization I see when it comes to trauma. People are convinced that there's something about them on a foundational level that is fucked up that made these things happen. Spoiler alert, what that really is an attempt to control a situation in which you had none. Because here's the thing, this is the logic on this. If you blame yourself, that means that you were in charge, which means that you could have made a different decision, which means you could have avoided this outcome entirely. None of that's true. None. It's all an illusion to try to feel like you are in control in a situation in which you had none. And that's what self-blame is all about. It's a last-ditch effort to try to take control of a situation when it was wrested away from us.
God damn. You're creating too many great sound bites for this.
Listen, I'm all about value creation, man. Like whatever is gonna be good for you. Like
no, no, this is awesome. I just like, fuck, this is gonna be so hard for me in the editing process in terms of like, what am I gonna clip from here for my Instagram? Like, there's so much to choose from.
yeah.
But no, man, like, yeah, I couldn't agree more, dude. Like, it's crazy. But yeah, how do you move on from that? Just,
Love, not to be cliche, but and
no,
psychedelics. That's
exactly. No, yeah,
the two answers to that are love and psychedelics, not for everybody. The
right.
asterisk that comes after that is not for everyone. As a
Yeah.
sidebar, psychedelics are a specialty that I'm pivoting my career towards in therapy, and I
Okay.
work I work with people who have a lot of complex developmental and interpersonal trauma. So these are folks who came from bad home lives or experienced really difficult situations very early on. And the reason I say love and psychedelics is that MDMA is actually about to become legal for therapy. The
Okay.
Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, MAPS, they put in an application to the FDA to use MDMA as a novel treatment for PTSD.
Mm,
For the last couple of years, they've been doing private studies with like military combat veterans and people who are severe abuse and trauma survivors to treat PTSD. And they finished their second phase 3 trial. And the numbers are bananas. You can go to their website, maps.org, and look it up. But 2/3 of people are no longer meeting criteria for PTSD following treatment. And there's not a medication on the market that can do that. And what happens in these expanded state experiences with MDMA specifically, it's what's called an empathogen versus an entheogen, which is like LSD, mescaline, psilocybin, stuff like that.
right.
Empathogens are heart openers, and the word euphoria gets used, but to me that feels very manufactured. That's not what it is. If you can imagine somebody reaching into your chest and turning up the love dial to like 10,
Mhm.
that's really what that experience is. It doesn't feel fake at all. It's this, my experience was a very deep seated, very deep rooted sense of love and appreciation and connectedness.
Huh.
And when you're a person who hasn't been able to experience that in an unadulterated, very safe, held way, that can be terrifying.
Yeah.
It's medicine that's needed because we need to have the ability to safely connect to people, right? Like we're social creatures. We need that. And
Hmm.
what this does is that this medicine specifically, it allows people to go back and revisit moments of their trauma. And it's one thing for me to sit across from somebody, G, and say, you didn't do anything to cause this. There was nothing about you that caused this violence to happen. There's nothing about your soul or any of your choices that you made, that made this happen. It's one thing for me to say that to you and for you to logically understand that. It's another thing entirely for you to be re-witnessing an element of your trauma and feel that somatic element like I was talking about earlier. To feel that saying of feeling it in your bones is what happens when your cognitive knowing and your somatic knowing are in agreement. When your mind and your body know something to be true, you feel it with your whole system.
Yeah.
And so what this does is this allows people to go back to those moments of trauma and see, no, this really wasn't about me. This was something else. And to have that reparative experience of being able to access self-love in a way that in ordinary consciousness, they can't. You know, people that are horrendously afraid of, you know, themselves and their confidence are finally able to see, no, I am a capable, confident, wonderful human being that is worthy of love just because I'm here. Like just because I am a person. And to watch people, you know, get quality of life back after being on 18 different medications for 25 different years and seeing, you know, 5 different therapies, like I think people should have the ability to heal and recover, and we shouldn't, you know, have to keep people on certain types of maintenance medications lifetime. Again, I hear the internet screaming from the back. I'm not anti-science. I'm not anti-meds. Okay. I believe that there are some people who are here by the grace of Prozac alone. Okay. And I'm not discounting that whatsoever. Unequivocally, what's been demonstrated is that these are medications that are not meant to be lifetime maintenance medications. You go look at the literature when this stuff first came out. Year max is realistically how long most people are supposed to be on these medications, but we treat them as what's called lifetime maintenance, i.e. you're taking Prozac for the next 30 years. Pharmaceutical industry doesn't have an interest in supporting psychedelic therapy because someone who has PTSD can either take Prozac for 35 years or they can take MDMA 2 to 5 times and then no longer have a diagnosis. So there's a big disruptor in mental health because it's not that psychedelics are a panacea or a silver bullet, something that just, you know, removes the trauma. It's not like the evangelical faith healing of be healed, you know. And I say this as a Southern Baptist, so if anybody gets mad. I was raised evangelical Southern Baptist, so I am aware. I can speak from that lived experience. Thank you very much. This is not a y'all motherfuckers need Jesus kind of thing. Like, no, that's not it. What it does is that it opens up the channels for people to do really deep work in a way that they can't otherwise. Like, you're doing years of therapy in a couple of hours. And that is the consistent report that people say when they come out of these experiences. They're like, I feel like I just did 10 years of therapy in an afternoon.
Wow.
Going and watching the footage, there's 2 things on YouTube I would encourage you to go look at. The first is some of the MAPS trial footage of people talking about their experiences on MDMA, and also the Johns Hopkins interviews with terminal cancer patients for their psilocybin study. Because what they're looking at is also helping people with end-of-life anxiety. So folks that are understandably freaked the fuck out because they're about to die, right? Yeah. Most people don't know that these were studies that were going on back in the 60s before the war on drugs happened, before Nixon and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
So old studies are now coming back. And so psychedelics are looking at treating trauma, treating end-of-life care, and also, you know, eventually pivoting to being, you know, frontline treatment options for people that are struggling primarily with trauma. But I mean, psilocybin and LSD both are actually very promising for alcohol use disorder. And ibogaine is huge among people that struggle with opioid use disorder. This is, you know, what people are turning to when they have nothing else. And it works. Not for everybody. I'm not somebody who thinks that we need to take the Timothy Leary route of putting LSD in the water supply, because no, it's not for everyone. But I really feel quite hopeful that folks are going to be able to access healing in a substantive way through these expanded states of consciousness that, when done in a culturally appropriate and therapeutically, clinically appropriate setting, it can really radically change people's lives. So being able to help facilitate that process for somebody feels like the ultimate way to, like, you know, give back, you know. Like, if I can help somebody take back their quality of life, I can die happy.
Yeah, I would imagine so.
And it's not even like me, like, making that happen for them, but being a part of, being a facilitator or a conduit for that experience to happen, because I wouldn't have gotten to where I am if somebody had not been that conduit for me.
Right,
like,
of course.
So it's kind of a pay it forward kind of deal. So my personal crusade is to have psychedelic treatment available to people on Medicaid. That's when I will lay down my banner from a policy perspective, is when everybody is able to access this. Then that will be I'll lay down that banner and I might pick up a different social cause. But for now, this is the one that I'm really focused on, is making sure that we can get this to as many people that want it as possible. Again, I don't think people should have to do this. But I don't think that people should be sent to jail for being able to recover from their trauma, man. Like when you say it like that, it sounds a little sus that people have a problem with that. But
Right.
the reality is that they do.
Yeah. Damn. Well, I think it's beautiful that that's what you're pushing for. You know, we can only hope that there's more, and I'm sure there's more people like out there like yourself. So, we always hope that there are just even more of that we're aware of.
Well, unfortunately, the East Coast is, I joke with people, we're anywhere from 10 to 15 years behind the West Coast. So over in, Colorado and Oregon, psilocybin assisted therapy is already up and running. Like they've not even waited for federal sort of intervention on a state level. They've gone ahead and approved that and have taken decriminalization measures to have more psychedelic medicines not available in the sense of like you can go to any sort of dispensary and pick them up, but recognizing that people are turning to non-pharmaceuticals for help. And the concern that I have as a mental health professional around this is that, going back to passive consumption on social media, people will see, TikToks or, clips of people talking about like, oh, I went and did ayahuasca in the jungle and it totally changed my... Dude, if you don't know what you are grabbing the tail of, you do not know what the fuck you are grabbing the tail of.
Yeah.
Like, there's no other way for me to put it. There are people who hear one or two positive things and are like, oh, it's going to be great. And then they're like screaming and shitting their brains out in the jungle, being like, what did I do to myself? Well, not apply critical thinking was number one.
Right.
But number two, because there's a cash cow incentive behind this right now.
Yeah.
People like me that are, wanting to do this from a culturally appropriate and appreciative position, and making sure that people are, being held in proper traditions and lineages, and also making sure that people aren't, fucking themselves up, for lack of a better phrase. Like,
Right.
people need support. You need to be prepared. You need to talk to somebody that's had that experience to help you understand, hey, here are some things that can come up for you. And then on the other side of that, what I see happening a lot, which is why one of the other things I do is prep integration work, is that, people go to a retreat out of the country in like, Mexico or, somewhere else in Central and South America, have a completely life-altering experience, and then come back to a context that has zero ability to hold space for that. What do you do when it's revealed to you that how you've been living your life is in complete opposition to your soul, and you come back to an environment that only reflects back to you who you were prior to that experience?
Yeah. Yeah, that's gotta be so like disheartening.
It's what I tell people is that when it comes to the psychedelic experience, a good metaphor simply to use is like, if I handed you a 10-pound uncut ruby, right, from the earth, I just plop that in your lap, G. You would agree that that's worth a sizable chunk of change as is, right?
Mm.
Like that's got some value.
Yeah.
If you want it to become even more valuable, you cut it, you
Mm.
refine it. The psychedelic experience is very much like being handed a raw gemstone. It is a valuable thing in and of itself and by itself.
Mm-hmm.
The beauty of the work is the unfolding that happens in the months after, because there's so much that changes after you have these experiences. That the way I described it to my mentor is that, my experience anyway, was that it's not always by something's presence, but rather the shape of its absence that you come to recognize what it is. And without that time, you don't get that ability to recognize the absence. So not everything is going to be available to you about that experience up front. It's going to be really valuable. You're going to see a lot, but like, I remember for me on a nervous system level, when I noticed that things were changing, I used to jump really hard, right? Like, so something would, like the air compressor for the air conditioning unit outside of my apartment in Richmond, I'd be sitting on my little, call it a patio, but it was like a 3-foot by 3-foot concrete slab, my little rocking camp chair. I'd be sitting on my patio slab, and the compressor would kick on, and I'd jump 3 feet like out of my chair and be like, that's so fucking dumb, like this is just a compressor, like you're fine, man. And I never will forget, I was sitting outside, it was like almost a year after I had started this process of like my own personal work, and the compressor kicked on, And it took a couple seconds for me to register that I had an entirely different response than what I was used to, because last year I nearly came out of my skin. That March, I didn't flinch. I didn't move. If anything, I erupted into ridiculous laughter and almost fell out of my seat because of how ridiculous it was to me that, such a small sound was something that, could send me, through to the next floor in the building. But, here I am a year later and I'm not even flinching. I'm not blinking. There's no fear in my body. And that's something that I would not have been able to recognize, had there not been that absence. I lived that whole year I was present in all of it, but it wasn't until I had such a clear comparison of these triggers or these stimuli, that I was able to be like, oh no, there's a huge difference here.
Yeah. Yeah. That's wild.
I know I'm throwing a lot at you.
No, I'm just taking it in. I'm just taking it in. Because I'm kind of like reflecting on past experiences with psychedelics, and I don't know if this relates, but it's like
All roads lead to
in
Rome, man.
in
Don't you know?
in the fire of it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, even bad experiences, right? It's like fuck, that fucking sucked. But then once you're in the clear, that's when, eh, at least for me, that's when I
Mm-hmm.
really start learning some shit. I think that's kind of like what you were saying before. It's like all the healing, I guess, is like it happens like months after the psychedelic experience, and that's kind of like, yeah, like I relate to that very much.
It's interesting in the literature because if you talk to seasoned psychonauts that are more clinically affiliated, i.e., people that are therapists that have been doing psychedelics for a very long time, they're in that gray area between they've worked in the underground, but they're also trying to bring it up. There's this oh gosh, the thought just left me. I am so sorry.
Okay.
This is gonna make it easier for the editing. The parts where he just completely loses his train of thought. Oh god, can you back me up?
No, I
It's okay.
can't. I'm
Let me
sorry.
see if I can. No, it's okay. Let me see if I can get this back on track. Psychedelics, expanded states of consciousness, seasoned ones, perspective difference. Where was it? See, this is what happens sometimes. This is the best description for ADHD, for non-ADHD folks. It's like you're standing at a platform where the trains are, and you're trying to read the number on the side, and that motherfucker takes off before you're done reading, and you
Mm,
don't know whether that was the train that you were supposed to get on or not.
mm.
So with that thought, I was still trying to read the numbers on the side, and it just left the station, and I have no idea where it was headed or whether or not I was supposed to be on
Well,
it. I can't.
I'm a terrible host because I should be right on track with you, and I can't backtrack.
No, it happens to me in session. And this maybe this can be a separate segment, but it's funny to me when I have clients that will be like, "Oh my god, can you say what you just said again?" And I'm like, "No, I can't," because I say this kind of jokingly, but I'm also semi-serious. When I get into like a flow state with clients, and if anybody that I work with happens to hear this, they'll know what I'm talking about. There's a moment of real emotional intimacy and presence that can happen when you're like in the thick of it and you're sitting across from somebody that is in it with you, where that's not me. I am a conduit. Like it's not like I'm not channeling in the sense of I have lost my consciousness and it's some separate entity that is taking over my body, but like I call it the therapeutic zeitgeist, source, God, whatever like that intuitive being with people where I am just saying a thing. I'm not thinking about what I'm saying, not in terms of like being thoughtless about what I am saying, but like I'm not scripting. I'm not preparing. I'm just speaking from the heart and being very genuine with my clients. And I will just say this thing like, "Oh, that's really good. Can you say that again?" I'm like, "No, I fucking can't because I can't remember what the fuck I just said." I don't like. I'm semi-coherent while this is like God is speaking through me. Not actually, like not in the preachy sense, but like that the therapeutic knowledge and the healing that you need. I am just a gateway. This is passing through. Don't ask me to hang on to this. So I empathize. You're not being a bad host. It means you're being present with. It means you're being present with your people.
Yeah.
So
Well,
don't feel bad.
that's been my thing. Like I feel like I try to be as present in our conversations to the best of my abilities, but unfortunately, just being a human than I am. Like sometimes I'm like, oh, I guess I'm not as present as I thought I was because I couldn't, I couldn't repeat the thing that was just said, or I couldn't help someone get back on track with
Nah.
their thoughts. It's like,
No, that's not what that is at all. That's you're just being a human. Because there'll be times where I'll do that with clients and I'll be like, I'm sorry, I completely forgot where this was going. Can you put me back on the tracks? And I think that those are the things that make me humanizing. And I think that that's again what makes me good at what I do is that I'm a person. I don't show up in like a button down, and it's no shade to the people that show up business cash or business formal to their job. Like everybody's got their thing, but like I remember having a conversation with somebody where we were talking about feedback. And if, my sessions were observed, I think that, people who were in charge of me would tell me that I probably needed to dress a little bit more professionally because, showing up in a Hogwarts hoodie and, a World of Warcraft hat, what you're taught in grad school is that you're supposed to be, polished professional, like,
right, of
that whole
course.
kind of thing. And I had somebody say to me, you know what, I'm really glad that you don't, because if you did, then this would actually feel like therapy and I wouldn't want to talk to you.
And I would say, at least from my perspective, like it's sometimes intimidating, like I was saying in the beginning, I was kind of uh is it self-deprecating? Like I was kind of just like shitting on myself, saying how, you know, just not having good vocabulary and this and that just in comparison with you. And like obviously you're much more well spoken than I am. So I'm like, all right, I'm gonna try not to sound like an idiot. I'm gonna try not to say as much. It's just
Don't seriously, man. Like I don't worry about it. Number one, number two, a little bit of the story of how I came to be the human sitting in front of you. So part of the reason that I have the vocabulary that I do, your boy was not real popular as a kid. And I used to sit inside and copy the dictionary instead of go out to the playground because people didn't like me. So that was my defense, was being intellectual.
see
And
at like on one hand, right, it's to be like, oh, that's unfortunate, right? You didn't have like that type of social life with, with kids and stuff. But then like, shit, someone like me that was very sociable, was, friends with, virtually with anybody. Like, in high school, I didn't have particular cliques. Like, I didn't just hang out with like I would hang out with some goth people. I would hang out with some like, jocks. Like I hung out with everybody. I was very friendly with everybody. That being said, I wish I had that in me where like, or I wish I was in that position where like I had no choice but to just study or something. Like, so, so when I hear that kind of story coming from you, I'm like, man, like sometimes I wish I was put in that position where I had no choice but to be studious and
well, it's
not.
a trade-off because like I hear about your social skills. I'm like, damn, I would love to have that because I didn't. There's all different things that we could point at as to why it is, but the reality is that for me, I didn't really feel like I was on the same place with people my age until I was in college, and it was this weird sense of distance that I had because I was a smart kid that got made fun of a lot for that because that was just I knew my method of escape from situations and circumstances was going to be education.
Mm.
I knew that if I wanted to go to college, I had to have good grades. And on a certain level, there were some things that were really easy for me and other things that weren't. This is called recovering gifted kid syndrome for anybody who might be nodding their head along at this point in time. The shitty thing that happens with that, and it kind of points to this right here between, your social skills and my dictionary copying, is that gifted kids, once they're identified, one, I think every kid's fucking gifted. They've done research that shows that most children reach criteria for like genius stuff very early on, but several years later through the conditioning, only like a small percentage of them still like have genius criteria.
Right. Mhm.
Genius is defined by creativity in problem solving. So everybody starts out incredibly brilliant. I
Yep.
don't think that there's anything about me that makes me special or better than other people. There's no elitism that I have around this. The bastards tried to get me to not be so weird and they failed. So that's why I stayed, the way that I am. But
Right.
gifted kids, the wound for a lot of them is that when you're not given the opportunity to be bad at things,
Mhm.
you create a complete aversion to them. So there was a very long period of time in my life where if I didn't know with absolute certainty that I wasn't going to be able to do this well, I wasn't going to do it at all.
Right. Yeah.
And that's like shooting yourself in the kneecap and then expecting yourself to be able to run a 5K. Like if we don't learn how to be bad at things and how to be okay at being bad at things, then that inhibits a learner mindset. And that's a misnomer for the high achieving gifted kids, because it's assumed that they know that's intuition. That's not learning.
Yeah.
Those are kids who are able to read a situation and can intuit what they're supposed to do based off of their experiences. That's where the creativity from the genius part comes in, right?
Right.
It's not actually because they're different or special. It's the ability to think in a way that other people have been conditioned out of.
Right.
And when you don't have, again, like I was saying, when you don't have that experience, you don't build that callus of not being good at things, you become incredibly fragile and you stay isolated and you withdraw from things and people, because if all you ever do is stay comfortable, your comfort zone shrinks
Yeah.
constantly. And that's what I've had to practice the last several years, being bad at things. So like when we met at that first vendor event, bruh, I
Oh.
hated it in terms of like that whole situation, because it was raining, it was
Yeah.
shitty, like it was a terrible situation. But
Well,
honestly,
you
like,
helped me with my tent because that shit almost blew away completely. And then that's how we started conversing.
yep.
So,
And
if it wasn't for that unfortunate happening, we'd never be here right
right,
now. Probably, I mean, who knows? But that's how I
but
look at it.
and in that circumstance of like, that was the worst possible way for me to start. Like that was literally
Yeah.
my like day one being
Yeah.
a vendor. Like I started in like some of the worst friggin' circumstances that you could. And for me, I could chalk this up to my anxious avoidant attachment style, but for me, I would rather the worst possible thing happen first, so that all of that shit's just out of the way. Like the worst has already happened. I can handle
That
anything
was
from
a
here on
shit
out.
show.
And you know what? That pivoted me for the rest of the summer and the season, because I was like, okay, I've literally been in the worst situation. It is pouring down rain. My tent's about to blow over. All my shit's getting rained on. Like, ain't nobody here. This is made no money. Spent a bunch of money to be here, but didn't make anything.
Yeah. And I remember you
Okay.
told me that you booked like every week, like
Yep.
almost every weekend.
Yep.
I was like, oh shit.
Yep. Yeah. No, because I mean, again, I was new. I was just like, I
Yeah.
don't know what I'm doing. It's
No, of
that
course.
going back to contextual acontextual results of that contextual work. This is the context. I'm gonna have to mess this up a lot. I'm gonna go to venues that aren't actually good fits for my art. I'm gonna meet people that, like, I've had other vendors, they weren't artists, and I think that that's probably what makes a difference, but I've had other vendors come up to me and just kind of like side eye my stuff, and I'm like,
Really.
okay, candles.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
like, I'm sorry, I ain't trying. Like, listen, I love me a good candle. Like, it's real weird, like the type of elitism that people get at vending events
Dude.
about what's legitimate and what's not. And it's just like,
Oh,
oh, I'm sorry, it's not like art's friggin' subjective or anything.
yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah. No, I agree. I agree. I mean, look, let's use this as a segue to get into your
Yeah,
art.
word,
After
dude, I don't care.
after
But yes,
almost an hour and a half of I mean, look, man, this has I said it before, I'm gonna say it again. This has been certainly one of the most brilliant conversations I've had.
I
Um
appreciate that.
so no, yeah, I'm loving every minute of it. So
Big same.
which is why it's been hard for me to transition into your artwork.
You got to shut me up, man. You just got to pivot. Like,
Yeah. I mean, I'm so bad at that. Like just in general, trying to like just in good intentions, like to cut
mhm,
someone off or something. But but yeah. So yeah, that I mean, so for like the audience, I mean, that is
mhm,
sort of how we met under those circumstances. We met at a. Actually, it's funny because I just plugged a pop up at the Diamond earlier
mhm,
because I'm doing one late April. But yeah, we met at the one of the spring events for pop up, and it was like one of the like just weather wise, it was just shitty. We're
mhm.
talking. Wait, I mean, I've talked about this day numerous times on this podcast.
It was bad. It was
It
really
was really
bad.
bad, and there was the guy that was set up directly behind me said something that like really stuck with me, and I kind of held on to it for a bit until I kind of just was like I just tried to be more understanding of like the whole like the bigger picture of things. But
Mhm.
he was just like because like I was on the verge of like, oh, like maybe I'm gonna like pack up. I mean, I did end up leaving early because I just didn't see any way of it getting better. Which ironically, later that day, as soon as I got home, the fucking sun came out. So I was like so pissed about that. Even though like who knows, I probably wouldn't like chances like me making money later on, like who knows. But the guy that did leave, that was set up behind me and left early because I was like, I wonder if there's gonna be any chance, like in this case, if we would get our money back or maybe get a percentage back because the weather
Mhm.
was just so bad. And the guy's just like, so the guy went to go talk to Brian, and he comes back. I'm like, oh, like he's like, oh, so what did Brian say? Like, are you gonna be able to get your money back? And he's just like, no. He's like, Brian wishes for bad weather, and I was like, ugh, that didn't sit well with me, and I'm like, and then it really kind of like created this narrative, which eventually I kind of just like talked myself out of it. I'm like, nah,
Yeah.
I don't fully believe that. I mean, if it'd be shitty of him to be able to hope for that, but I was
Mhm.
like, no, I don't believe in that anymore.
Yeah.
But yeah, well, that was indeed a shit show. I mean, we're talking hard winds, the heavy rain,
You
just
remember
the
the woman that was set up that was just in like a flimsy yellow poncho that had like no tent, no nothing. This one was just like her and I think it was like succulents or something. It was or body like stuff. Like I want to say I saw like tiny potted plants and like lotion or something. And it was just like it was a deluge. Like it was like monsoon level rains for people that are like
it was
literally this
bad.
was it was bad. Like
Yeah,
sheets of just rain just blowing. Like
yep,
my feet are soaked. I've got everything pulled into the middle of the tent, like holding on to the tent and my stuff, trying not to blow. It was so
dude,
bad.
yeah, it was so
So
bad.
bad.
Like and like Nicole, that was the day Nicole wasn't helping me. She had I think she was just out with her family, and she had to. I was like, yo, I need you to come back and like bring extra weights of like anything. I need just anything that's got weight to it to hold my tent down because this shit's
Yep.
blowing away.
Mm-hmm.
But but I'm gonna, spin it on a positive and say, hey, we started we that's how we met. And it created this wonderful friendship that we have so far. So
Yeah. Well, people forget that bullshit's fertilizer. So
yes, I love it. No, for sure. So this brings me to this question. And
mhm.
actually there might be some repeated questions from like our first initial conversation. So
It's all
this is
good.
like purely for the content.
Yeah.
But like, what made you embark on the artist path?
Mm.
Being a therapist that you are, having the master's degree and all this. Like, like, where, like, how did the shift happen?
Mhm. I was actually thinking about this because I figured there was going to be some iteration of like, how did you get into art and all this? Because I mean,
That
that's
is
what you
one of
do.
the
Like
initial key
that's
points
yeah.
of Todd. Yeah.
And the the reality is that it's always been something that I have done. My relationship to art as a concept is something that has changed a lot throughout my life because I was a very creative kid. I drew a lot. I spent a lot of time outside. My parents were upset at how much money they had to spend on paper rolls because I don't know if you remember these or if you had one, but like it was like Fisher Price or like Play School or something. They had these easels. It was these big blue plastic easels that you could get like rolls of paper for, and it was a chalkboard behind it. And there was a little an area where you could put that roll of paper and like pull it down, tuck it into a little lip, and then you could like paint or draw on it, pull it down, tear it off, and then you keep.
Yeah.
I used to do that. Like I would come home from school, like get half naked, throw my backpack off, and then like run to my easel. Like I wish I could tell you I was kidding. I'm not. I go to my easel, and that's just like where I would hang out. But as most kids find out, your creativity time gets cut down the longer that you're in school. So
Hmm.
arts and crafts starts going away and recess is shorter and free time is not really a thing and everything's filled up and then you start having homework. So because I didn't get identified as being gifted in that way, that was one of those things that fell to the wayside. My ability to read and write, those were things that, bode well for like how, public school was, siphoning me through that process. So I ended up forgetting it for a very long time. And just kind of, I told myself that I was not an art person. And I used to look at the kids that, I was jealous of the kids in art class because I wanted to take those classes. But again, being a college prep brainy type, they're shoving me in every CP AP class that they can. I'm not taking art classes. I'm taking all the academic stuff. And it wasn't until I was actually in grad school, kind of weave a little bit back and forth here, but like ultimately to the long-winded answer is my mental health was really bad several years ago. And that is really what changed my relationship with art and with the art that I make specifically to what it is now, because it used to be something that I only ever did when it was really bad. Like if you saw me drawing 6 years ago, you needed to be concerned. Like it was that level. And so I started at this place of being, at rock bottom with my mental health and finding that art was really the only thing that was a balm. Like engaging in this creative process, despite how much pain that I was in, and just being able to put that on a piece of paper was cathartic and therapeutic and healing in a way that I didn't really recognize at the time. But, sitting here and looking back on it, I can see very clearly now that it's like, okay, this was the only thing that was offering me any sort of relief, but I had this historically negative relationship with it. And so for me, the last several years have been a reclamation process of, how do I pull this thing that saved my life out of the muck that it had to fall into? How do I save this from, the dark depths, or for my Jungian psychology minded people, how do I reclaim this from my shadow? Like, how do I go deep diving into something about myself that I've rejected and consciously pull that out of the depths and bring it back into who I am now? And so I'm self-taught. I watch tutorials and things online. I look at other people's styles. I wouldn't say that I have like a voice the way that some people do. I think I'm too curious to have a voice. Because my art, I've noticed, is really iterative, and by that I mean I will pick a concept or a topic or an idea, like the hands that I've got and stuff over here. Those are all iterative. That's me tracing my own little paw and then playing with design elements again and again and again. It's the same thing with gotta look, the eye that's over here. I've made a couple of those where I sit and I'm thinking about what is it that I'm trying to communicate here. Like what is it that I'm trying to say that doesn't have words yet? Because art very much is talking about things that you don't have words for, at least in my experience.
No, I agree with that 100%. Yeah.
And how do you find a way to communicate that? And there was I think it was a commercial for like an art website or something, but I never will forget it because it was one of those interviews that like you're not expecting profundity, but there it is. It just ambushes you in a Facebook ad. This guy's being interviewed. He's an artist, and the artist says, "I have absolutely no technical ability or skill whatsoever." And the interviewer says, "Then what do people pay you for?" And the artist takes a moment and he says, and I'm kind of butchering it, but he says something to the effect of, "For my ability to communicate what I see and my taste." And I think that on a certain level, I think that's true for anybody who's a creative. And I don't think that when I say creative, I don't just mean like folks like us that are making, physical, drawings, paintings, sketchings like that. Like people who crochet, potters, if you are,
all of the above.
I mean, even plumbers and electricians, like if you are in the process of synthesis, i.e. you are taking multiple things and making a new thing out of them, you're a creator. And I think that there's a certain amount of, not to sound hyperbolic, but I really think there's a certain amount of divinity in that we overlook. Because we like to think of God as being something external. This is my personal metaphysic I'm going into. A lot of us think of God as being external, but when you think about what that really is in terms of like the power of creativity and the power of being able to imagine things, we are all tiny gods running around. We all have this incredible ability to create, whether it's another living being or a moving piece of art or a film or a meal or a moment, anything that we're creating. Yeah. Like that's the essence of life. Like that is the divine, being able to touch that and being able to create an experience, for other people. The biggest compliments that I've gotten from my art never resulted in sales. Okay. I want to make that very clear. And I walked away from one event feeling incredibly rich with no money,
Oh,
because what had happened is that I'm not sure how visible it is, but like the black and white checkerboard for some people it's visually overwhelming for a lot of people, and I kind of like that because I feel like I am sometimes a little bit overwhelming and hard to figure out.
I mean,
But
some of us, I'll say there are a lot of us that enjoy chaos. So
right, I'm a cheeky little goblin, so I like having fun. I as long as it's benign overwhelm, like I don't want somebody to like have a panic attack, but I
right.
really enjoy making people uncomfortable in a generative way. It's not for the Schadenfreude or the enjoyment of somebody else's downfall. It's I like making people think. And there was this older
Exactly.
gentleman who not at all interested in my art from like a lifestyle perspective. Like, my stuff is more psychedelic rainbow. This guy looked very blue collar, working class, and he was
Yeah.
walking by. No, like he was in the middle. Like I'm sure you're familiar with this. The people that don't want to be talked to walk in the middle. They're far enough away that like
Yeah.
they don't think they're going to be
Yeah.
called out to, but like it's trying to maintain that social buffer, right? So like
Yeah.
dude was in the middle, like obviously like had no intention of coming over whatsoever. I
Yeah.
love that you know exactly what I'm talking about.
I'm laughing because when I see that, like if I even when I see like a group of three people that are in that lane,
Mm-hmm.
they're like, they're discussing something. I will be like, "Hey, what's up?" Yeah. What are you guys talking about? And
Just
then they
lean
come
in.
closer, and then there's sometimes, and then you know, sometimes it leads to a sale, or it just leads to a great conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And if I may add to like what you're saying in terms of like when you leave a show, when you're granted not money like purchases, but you leave with all this positive feelings of like from your interactions and
Mm-hmm.
like feedback and stuff. Like I talk about that all the time. Like if I can, it sucks, right? It sucks that I can't, I didn't break even,
Mm-hmm.
whatever. But sometimes, even oftentimes, when you have enough conversations with people, like just that alone can like just it takes away that shitty feeling of like, oh, I didn't make a dime. But man, the networking, the interactions, discovering how my art has invoked such feelings or
Mm-hmm.
memories to people, like all that shit, like
Yeah, and this
worth
dude,
more than money.
yeah, and so like middle lane dude just like stops dead in his tracks and is like, "Whoa."
Yeah,
Like I mean, he literally looked like he walked into a wall. Like that was how physical of an experience
I
it. Like
love
he was
those.
he was caught totally off guard. And I'm not gonna lie, that was a huge ego stroking moment for me. I was like,
Oh
"Oh
yeah.
yeah." I just it's a huge compliment. How can you not take it? And again, that didn't result in a. I have all the originals of those. I've sold plenty of prints, got the originals, but like for me, to your point, like you were saying, it's about what are the intangible things that we're getting from these interactions.
Hmm.
And I think that on a certain level, because this is a business, for both of us, there are certain business realities that we have to attend to in terms of, are we breaking even, are we pricing
Yeah.
things, are we making sure that we are accurately valuing ourselves and our work for other people. There's absolutely an aspect of that, and those intangible things where I've got to have so many conversations with people about psychedelic therapy because of my work, and whether or not they work with me or not, or they've had their own experiences. Oftentimes I end up finding out that when I talk to people, they're like, oh yeah, I had a cousin, or oh, I actually just got back from Peru, or like
Oh
you know
yeah, man. Yeah, dude. That's beautiful. Yeah, I
so
mean,
yeah.
yeah, like yeah, just like we're talking about, like just the conversations that come out of those moments. It's a
Mm-hmm.
beautiful thing. And yeah, the like you're speaking of that gentleman that stopped short and like looked at your work. I love those, and I love the double takes when they're like just about to pass your table and they're like
Yep. I don't
That's
know if
what I'm
this has
like.
happened.
What's up? You want to come take a closer look? And then
Right.
just let's just talk about it. Maybe you might want it in your home, but it's just like I try to I try to catch those people because I want to know what's going on in their wheelhouse from that point on.
I'm not sure if you've had this happen to you, but I've had a couple moments where I'm like, the kids are all right. I have like single digit age kids from like 8 or sometimes I think the youngest one I've had was like 6 or 7, but like usually like 8, 9, 10 year olds will come up to me and just say the most encouraging stuff. They'll be like, your
Oh,
art's really pretty. I think that's really cool. We did this. It's like just I'm like, okay, the kids are gonna be all right. Like they're gonna be a-okay. Like and
yeah.
it's I mean, you can make the argument of, how sad it is that, you're getting affirmation from a little kid. But for me, it's like,
Well,
no, these are
there's a
kids that
purity in that, though.
these are kids that see that I am doing a thing. And I've actually got to have a conversation with a couple younger kids who their parents were the proud parent complex. I love because the parents are like, see, look at all this, like, pulling up their kids, like artwork. And the kids like, mom, dad, like, like, and I get that, from the kids' perspective, they're looking at me and seeing capital A artist, even though that's not how I conceptualize myself,
I
at
mean,
all.
there's levels to this thing.
Right. Yeah. So there's like all the nuance that's in that. But like the conversation that I've had with, kids and also other people that have been interested in it, asking like how I got into this. At a certain point, I had to level with me that I was the only person telling me I couldn't do this.
Mm.
All my friends were like, yeah, dude, like I think that you could like do this sustainably. Like you have, an interesting perspective on things. You make some cool shit. Like, yeah, I think that this could be something that's, realistic. And when I recognized at the end of the day, I was the only person talking shit about my art. I was the only person saying I couldn't do it. I was the only person being like, "Arr." That
Yeah.
was really confronting because everybody was in my corner, but I was convinced that they weren't when really I wasn't in my corner. And
Yeah.
that was what was preventing me from going forward. So
Yeah. Once
much
you
in
bet,
that, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No.
But no, yeah, once you bet in on yourself, like once you fully invest on yourself, that's when like fucking the magic really starts
Yep.
happening. Yeah.
So, like I was saying, as part of that reclamation process of like, okay, I'm doing things that scare me. That previous versions of me would be like, no, you can't do this. Who do you think you are? And then, yeah, I have moments where I'm like, should I really be doing this? Do I have the right to call myself this? Should I really be
Imposter
here?
syndrome.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And then again, having interactions like that with that guy or with these young kids, or being able to talk with people about how psychedelics or art have impacted them. Like that's going back to those intangibles. Like that's you can't put a price on those things. And when it comes to being a small business owner, especially vending in a community way like we do, I'm thinking also of like my farmers market and the cheesemonger locally that I am head over heels in love with in a platonic lactose way. She's a super great lady and makes amazing cheese. I'm just like,
Okay.
oh, I just want your talents. There's something to being, she calls it a rock in the stream because she's, a consistent vendor every Saturday. She's selling her cheeses and she sees a variety of people moving through. And I had some empathy that spiked for me when you were talking about like being on like the side of my booth and talking to me there. I'm always convinced whenever I go chat with a cheese lady that like I am taking up her time and just being really obtrusive. I've hung out with her for like up to an hour before, and I've been like, you need to chase me off. And she's like, you're fine, whatever. Just like keep hanging, do whatever. Like I'm not obstructing her business. I'm not, preventing her from doing anything, but it's that sense of when you are a regular aspect of a community and you get to have those person to person conversations. That's what community is really about. It's about, being able to connect with people face to face in an authentic and genuine way, and to know the name and the story to a certain extent of the people that are making goods for you, whether that's at the farmers market, bakers, butchers, cheesemakers, people that grow flowers and vegetables and things like that. There's something that's really empowering about knowing the person that made my food, the same way that it's really empowering to know the people that make my art.
Yeah.
Like I make a point to buy from other artists when I go to other shows, and I actually it's out of frame, but I've got a couple prints from other people that are
Okay.
raccoon oriented that are up. But I think that it's important to have those connections and to give each other those moments of visibility, because I feel like,
Mhm.
and this is I struggle with social media like really really bad. Like I'm sorry I have not promoted things for the podcast. It ain't personal. Like I
Fine.
can empathize with Nicole in terms of being a consumer and not a producer. But for me, what that's really rooted in is that I have an issue with perception.
Mhm.
I don't have a problem being seen. I have a problem being perceived. And the difference I make is, being seen is fine. Being perceived is, you can look at me, but draw no judgments about anything that you see. Come to no conclusions. Because
Mhm.
there's like a real fear of rejection and visibility, right? And vulnerability and putting yourself out there and saying, this is me and this is who I am and this is what I think and what I feel and what I see. And as artists, we are in no uncertain terms taking the very real risk of having people laugh in our face because of that.
Yeah. Yeah, and my only advice for that, and something easier said than done, of course, but this is like something I took from Joe Rogan, is that just post and ghost. Post and ghost. Don't worry about, don't worry about if people are gonna like it. Don't worry if people comment. I mean, if you feel inclined to read it, sure, but I mean, yeah, just post and ghost if you're feeling sort of doubtful or concerned about like how is this gonna come across to people? How are people
Hmm.
gonna, yeah, how people are gonna perceive it? Just put it out there anyway, and then just move forward. But I know it's so much easier said than done. But I mean, it's kind of like just how I am partially speaking out of experience too. Like, because when
Hmm.
you worry about those things, it's gonna hinder you from moving on.
Hmm. Oh,
Um,
absolutely. And that's the that's the fun part for me, with all the different interests that I have, but specifically, being a therapist. I always tell people I do not have my shit capital T together, and my greatest fear is that my clients think that I do. And I get
yeah,
to on a certain level that they're supposed to have that expectation because there's this idea that we as clinicians have the healing, and you as the client are supposed to present yourself on supplicated bended knee and say, please give me the healing. And that's not actually how this shit works at all. I think
yeah.
that's how people want it to work because, again, people want to externalize. They don't, people get real mad, G, when you tell them that they are the answer to their problems. I
Oh
can't tell
yeah.
you, like, you
I
probably do believe me, but like, it's wild. People really want the solution to be something that has nothing to do with them most of the time. And
yeah.
people get big mad when I just keep holding up a mirror and saying, no, it's you.
No, yeah, I agree with that. And I think there's also like something about like how it's presented to them. Like if when
Mm-hmm.
you're saying like you are the solution, you are the answer to your problems or your wonders. It's like you are it. But it's just like how can you convey that to someone in order for them to really accept it at fate,
And for me, I think that's where authenticity and integrity and alignment sort of come into play. Like in my job, I can't walk people through things that I've not faced within myself. Like there is a direct one-to-one correlation between my personal work as a human and my ability to help people as a clinician. So it's about experiencing your own shit. How do you help somebody through something? Be willing to face it inside of
Oh
yourself.
my goodness. Yeah. I mean,
And go ahead.
no, 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 you can.
Just, like that. It's that game of chicken of who goes because we're
Yeah,
both like that's
sorry.
the thing. We're really excited.
I get
No,
I get
like
so excited.
same. So it's we're doing it to each other. It's the interrupting cow, just going back and forth. Like ain't mad about it though. No, not at all. Excuse me. Oh, and now I lost the thought again.
But when
Jesus.
you're trying to like convey something to somebody, like as a clinician,
Yeah. Having that discernment of how you reflect that back because it depends on the relationship. Like there are some manners of reflection that are pretty direct, where and I tell people I'm the type of person that if you're stepping in shit, I'm gonna tell you it smells bad.
mm,
Like I'm not really in the business of enabling people, and I think that people have an idea that what's her name, Taylor Tomlinson. She's a stand-up comedian. She said everybody thinks that going to therapy is you sitting there and somebody telling you you suck. In reality, it's you going and sitting down and saying I suck.
yeah, yeah,
And
it's
it's really what it
hilarious.
is. It's that constant self-judgment that people are thinking is coming from us, but that's a call that's coming deep, deep, deep from inside the house.
Hmm.
And being able to help people. There's a lot of grief in healing. People don't mourn the things that have happened to them. And that's kind of what that pause is about, is like, how do I put words to this? Most people are afraid of things that are outside of their known experience because it's been so awful every time that things have changed. And people, there's that saying, everything you want is on the other side of fear. And my modulation to that is actually everything you want is on the other side of grief, because
Hmm.
people are afraid of feeling grief. Because when we feel really large, overwhelming emotions, especially grief, which is in no uncertain terms tied to mortality and existentialism and why are we here, like all that kind of stuff. Um, when we're not able to witness that, to be present in it, to feel it, to process it, we don't grieve, we don't mourn, and we hang on to these things. And grief is a purge. you know. And in psychedelics, the purge is talked about a lot, and that's usually when people get physically ill. People make the argument, like with, you know, psilocybin and ayahuasca, on a certain level it's poison, that's why you're, you know, having this hallucinatory, you know, response, and why, you know, you're throwing up and running to the bathroom and all this other kind of stuff. But the purge isn't just on a physical level, it's also emotional and psychosocial. If you don't grieve what has happened to you, you are hanging on to it in perpetuity, because you're not accepting that it's over and done. It's like we talked about earlier in the conversation. The hardest thing for some people to hear is that the moment of intercession is past, the trauma is over, it's not happening anymore, it's done.
Yeah.
But people will hear that, and that will be super activating to them and a really big threat.
Yeah.
So
Seriously, true. I really resonate with what you're saying, because like, you know, especially regarding like when when you try to present that the person you're talking, like the person that has these issues are,
mm-hmm,
they are also the solution.
mm-hmm,
So I resonate with that a lot, because particularly pertaining to health and weight loss, let's say, because I used
mm-hmm.
to be fat and overweight, and I find like anytime I hear someone struggling to become healthier, just generally healthier, I like, you know, that hits such a nerve for me. And then I become this like kind of like just over passionate, overzealous person, because like I know the feeling, I know what it's like to be in that position, and to be able to be able to have them allow themselves to see the other side of it, be like, and to get through that fire. It's like you just have to like get through it. I mean, it's gonna take a lot of, you're gonna humble yourself a lot. It's gonna be a lot of, there's probably gonna be a lot of downs in the beginning, and then you're gonna start. It's like you just gotta overcome that shit to really start feeling the full benefits of like, oh my God, this is amazing. Why did it take me so long to get to this position? You know what I mean? It's like,
Mm-hmm.
so I mean, I hope this kind of aligns with what we're talking about just before, because like, I don't know, like because it's hard to like
Mm-hmm.
really have them realize like it's gonna require a lot of like changes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like it's not always like the outside, it's also like your environment that you're in, you know, the toxic you know, these toxic habits, and you know, the cycles of things, like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, like it's just, and it's so hard to like convince them to do that for themselves. Like,
And
don't do it because I'm saying this is the thing to do, but it's just like, you know, if you do it, you will see like what I'm talking about. You're gonna see that light, and it's like it's so tough to get them out of their comfort zone. You know, like one of the things I would always say is like you're gonna be able to get comfortable being uncomfortable, getting through these exercises or whatever. Like, sure, calorie deficit sucks, but once you realize, like, when you're fueling your body with the necessary nutrients, you're gonna be like, oh, I don't need all that sugar and all that bullshit, because I actually feel good when I just eat this stuff. You know? And then you start real, oh, I do feel like shit when I eat McDonald's for
mm-hmm.
breakfast or whatever, right? It's just like,
Yeah.
so like kind of just talking about helping them see
Mm-hmm.
the light, you know.
And the discernment that I would put on that is that there's like, you know, when you're talking about with your struggles of having been there, and you know, wanting to provide that encouragement for other people, part of the discernment, you know, when you're in a healing position, whether you're a doctor, therapist,
Yeah.
nurse, acupuncturist, massage therapist, like literally anybody that works with people, is the discernment between a lot of time, this is the best way I can think of to say it. A lot of times people ask me for a logical step-by-step process of a felt sense experience, and that shit does not translate.
Mm,
So when people ask me questions of, well, how do I feel this way? My answer is, you feel it.
mm.
And people are like, well, that doesn't fucking help, because if I could, then I would. And I'm like, you got it. There's a certain amount of grokking out that
Yeah.
we have to do.
Gotta
And people
experience
are,
it.
people are really averse to that. And what I tell them is that, they're going to be trailheads. I never talk about things directly. Part of this is I chalk it up to being Southern. My people are storytelling people. It is a pastime. You are to be, as entertaining as you can be. But people, I tell them, this is a trailhead that I can walk you to, but I can't walk with you down it. I can help you identify it, but that's a trail you're going to have to walk on your own. I can't do that work for you. Yeah. So whether that comes to sitting with hard feelings for the first time or having a personal realization, that has to be a felt sense thing that people will stumble into. But that goes back to, again, what the themes that we've been returning to of, are people willing to move past the fear of their current self-definition? I tell clients, you got to want it more than you're afraid of it. do you want the change more than you are afraid of the change? And most of the time, and this probably won't surprise you to learn either, I would say 80 to 90% of the time, people don't change because they want to, G. They do it because it is excruciating to stay the way that they currently are. And that's an internal limit that people have to hit. And part of what I have to do as a clinician is let people struggle. It's really difficult because, and this goes back to the, holding space for people without trying to control their experience and make it better for them, because sometimes the most therapeutic thing I can do is just sit there and look at somebody. It's not an intervention. It's not something I learned at a certificate weekend. It's literally me just sitting and being with that person in that experience. It's not trying to modulate it or change it, because I'm modeling to that person, hey, I'm capable of sitting with you in this, which means that you can sit in this.
Yeah. It makes me think about this great quote by Bruce Lee, actually. Hold on. I don't know. I feel like this kind of this correlates to what we're talking about. And he says that his quote is, I am not teaching you anything. I just help you to explore yourself. Right.
Yeah. And that's, I'm shaking my head real big, or because do you listen to Alan Watts at all?
I know the name. I'm sure, like, I wouldn't be able to, I would have to like see his work to really.
So he's,
I know him.
I love him a lot as a philosopher. He's a dead white guy that was very popular in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And I have to say that because I have to qualify it. Like, he's a white British dude that used to be like a Church of England minister that like did drugs and got into Eastern culture and started wearing kimonos. And like, what I really appreciate about him, though, is that the man never took himself seriously. And he actually called himself a spiritual entertainer. And he says basically the same thing as Bruce Lee. He's like, I am not here to teach you or convince you of anything. I have nothing to teach. I'm just talking to you. And that's actually a very interesting, this is how this ties into mental health for me. In the practice of Zen Buddhism, when you go to join the monastery, you have to make a complete and total public ass of yourself. Like, you have to sit outside the gates for 3 days and ask to be let in. And like, they'll feed you rice and they'll be like, we have nothing to teach you. And you're like, but all these people, they're not learning anything because we're not teaching it. You have to make a big deal out of the fact that there is something wrong with you that only Zen is going to be able to fix. And it's getting people to persist in the folly of, okay, there's something wrong with you, then prove it. Let's find out what's wrong with you. And going, ad nauseum, ad ridiculum with people to recognize that the reason that you have a problem is because you said you had a problem. I recognize people can make that in a very, like, I hear the screams from the internet of the incredibly reductionistic, because those are unhealed people. Like, that's really what, like, from a therapist's perspective, those are unhealed people, because those are folks that are not capable of hearing something that might challenge their worldview.
Oh my goodness. Yep.
Instead of being able to sit with, why does this feel like a threat? Why do I feel the need to? And that's a question I ask myself. The number of times that I near miss swerve off from commenting on something, right? Because like, I'll be reading, I'll be like, oh, and I'll start to be like, is this going to help in any way, shape, or form? And who am I to think that my inconsequential opinion of screaming into the void on this one matter is gonna, like, no. So for those people that get in that really reductionist place, please go to therapy. Like, on either side of the political spectrum. I don't care what it is. Like, if it's getting to the point where you can't tolerate something that's outside of your own personal experience, danger. That is red level. Like, there's a whole world happening outside of your understanding of it.
Yeah.
Which is news to people. It's
Yeah.
shocking to me that it is, but I think that that's I have been gifted with enough experiences that I'm not going to say that I 100% know what it's like to not be the default, because clearly I'm a white guy. Like let's name the privilege for what it is, okay? So I recognize that I'm not going to ever 100% know what it's like to not be the default, okay, or to not have my personhood considered in some way, shape, or form. I have been gifted with enough experiences to get a glimpse of what that's like. And instead of that making me really possessive and defensive and fragile over the ways in which I do experience being a default and then want to defend, why it's okay,
Yeah.
that's really just a bigger invitation to empathy for other people that don't have that default consideration. And what does it really cost me to take 2 seconds to think about somebody other than me? It's like the shopping cart question. It's a new permutation of that. And the shopping cart question is, you're in a parking lot, okay? It's empty. There's a person whose job it is to corral the carts. No one's looking, no one cares. Someone is going to get the shopping cart regardless. Do you put it back or do you leave it beside your car?
Mm.
What would you do?
I always put it back, actually.
Same. And here's the thing. There are people who hear this question and are like, leave it, of course. And they don't understand. They really don't. They miss entirely what that question is about. Because to them, they're like, well, it's somebody's job and I don't have to be held accountable because there's this other thing. It's like, no, it's the fact that like no one's looking and you're not going to benefit from this. There is no one who is going to pat you on the back or give you an attaboy on the bum for putting away your shopping cart. Okay. There's no reward for that. It's being willing to consider somebody else outside of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And for people who answer the shopping cart question, leave it. As an emotionally healthy person, I'm saying this as a civilian, not as a clinician. In my civilian life, if I run into people that answer the shopping cart question with "I leave it," I'm like, cool, we're not going to get along. We are fundamentally different people. And I get that there are some people who could say that that's reductive, but for me, it's gotten to the point where if I have to do a humanity check and you don't pass, I feel like I'm fine to pass. You know,
Yeah.
like there's nothing about me that's going to gift that person their humanity back.
Yeah.
So
That's so funny, right? Because like I no matter what, I always put the cart back. But I'll, to sort of play devil's advocate, like if I park in a place, if I, park into a spot and there's a cart there that wasn't put back in the cart station, I'd be like, oh, cool. Like I don't have to I don't have to walk over there to get a cart. It's like right here. So,
mm-hmm.
but yeah, again, just me,
Mm-hmm.
I always put it back just because, fucking that's why they're there. That's how logical I think about it. I'm like, I mean, there's you got these stations for a reason. You got to put them back there. Sometimes they cause accidents. Like so,
But again,
that's
that reflects back to that inability to think out of one person's perspective, because literally
yeah,
just in that the station is designated for it. There's a social contract kind of around it. And yeah, they can be really dangerous when they're just like free roaming in a parking lot. People who say, no, I just leave it, they don't think about any of those things. All they think about is, well, somebody else is going to get it and I don't have to. And it's very easy to get very judgmental when people are operating from that place. Okay.
yeah.
And this is where, therapist Alistaire steps in and has to have those moments of discernment, because, the viewfinder pops up on these people. And when I'm encountering somebody that feels such a deep need to defend their personal experience, that is a huge indicator to me that somewhere along the line, something really important happened to this person that they were not believed. And I'm
Mm,
not making assumptions about what that was, but like something happened. You were completely and totally invalidated. You didn't get the support that you need. So what you learned is that you have to fight tooth and nail to have your perspective heard, regardless of what it costs somebody else, because that's what was modeled for you.
yeah.
And again, that's the difference between personal and professional. Professionally, I can summon that compassion in the moment when I'm working with people. When I'm out in civilian life, I'm at the grocery store and somebody's being a dickhead to a cashier, I get to choose, right? And I get
Yeah.
to choose, one, is this going to be a problem? And two, that then prompts the question for me of, in the wake of this other person, who do I want to be to this cashier?
Yeah. This is such a funny. I'm sorry. This is so fun talking about. This makes me also think about. This is actually another great scenario, right? Because we
Hmm.
talk about whether you not you put the shopping cart back, whether there's people around or not. Let's say when you're on the road, turning signals.
Oh
Do you
God.
always use the turning signal, whether or
Yes.
not someone's behind you?
Yes.
Yes. I'm a huge stickler for turning signals, man. If you're gonna
Same.
merge or you're gonna turn, whether or not someone is there behind you, I still use that shit. Just just because that's why they're built into the cars. It's how we prevent accidents. Again, even if no one's around, I still fucking do it just because I mean it's part of my nature, really.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's the same thing. I mean, even when people when you're behind, I'm sometimes I still find myself astonished by like when I'm behind people and they're doing a right on red and they won't signal, and I'm just like like what if something happened? Like that's like the thinking I get into. I'm like, yo, what if something happened? Like, God forbid. I'm just like, I don't know. That's just
It's the communication part, right? Because when
yeah,
somebody's so absorbed in their own experience that they just, I guess, assume other people are going to know that they're merging or other people are just going to get out of the, like, you are
yeah,
so consumed with your thought process and your
right,
experience that it does not occur to you that people are not going to be on your wavelength or know what
yeah.
the hell you're doing. Like,
I mean,
that's,
I mean, I get even more heated when people like. I mean, getting cut off sucks, but getting cut off and when the person's not using a signal, I'm like, oh, you're an extra asshole. Like,
I actually I use that experience to as a teaching moment with clients actually because this is
yeah.
and this is another humanizing point for me is that I your boy is calm most of the time,
Uh-huh.
okay, until I'm not, and one of the fastest ways to make me not is to cut me off. Then I want to put my foot up your ass to the knee, okay, like that big mad, big mad, okay.
Yeah.
The emotional response is rage, okay? Because that's the knee jerk, uncontrolled reaction that I am having. There is no conscious thought that's going into this. I'm having a knee jerk reaction.
Hmm.
That emotion becomes a feeling when I start attaching a narrative to that emotional experience, i.e., I start personalizing it, saying this, this is an asshole, this motherfucker's out to get me. Like when you start
Uh,
personalizing it, you're shifting from an emotion to a feeling.
uh,
And the more you tell yourself the story, the more that you're mashing the button in your body that creates the neurochemical cocktail that keeps that emotion happening. So an
uh,
emotion doesn't have a story attached to it. It's a physiological response. The feeling is what happens when you attach a cognitive narrative to it. If you're
uh,
wanting to interrupt an emotional and feelings oriented response to something, that means being willing to witness the feeling and not attach a story. It's real fucking hard to do. Spoiler alert.
yeah, yeah.
Like I teach people how to do this and I'm still working on it because
Oh,
again, if I get
nice.
cut off in traffic, that is my number one capital T trigger. I am no longer therapeutic. There are blue
Oh,
streaks flying out of my car. Like
that's so funny.
that's my thing, man. That's it's one of my big
No,
things.
I relate, man. It's so funny story because like I mean, so you met Nicole
Hmm.
a couple occasions. I mean, she's a sweetheart, right? And but she definitely has road rage. I mean, cursing out, right?
Big
And
same girl, me too.
I mean, it's right. It's like a pretty standard type of road rage, right? My
Especially if
road
you're living in
rage,
Richmond. Like
my road rage is a little different.
yeah.
I like to do this thing where, I mean, especially when someone cuts me off. If someone cuts me off and then they zoom, right? They go way ahead. I like to do this thing where I'll go in the next lane over. I catch up to this person to the point where we're like neck and neck. And then when I can find a pocket of time, of just a short window of time where I look over and we make eye contact, I do this. And then I drive off. And then I cut them off. It's so fucking petty, but
Little
man,
tit for
does
tat in
that feel
there.
good? Just like, and then I just fucking speed off.
And see those moments, like, yeah, sure, we could sit here and be like, oh, that's super petty, you shouldn't do that, and what, you're a grown-ass man, you can make your own decisions. The thing that I'll say is that when those moments happen, they're always good invitations to look at, what's sort of going on under the hood, not because there's necessarily anything inherently wrong, right? I think that's the problem a lot of people take is they assume that if they're asking a question, then that must mean that they're pathologizing or problematizing it. Meaning, if I'm getting curious about this, then it must be a capital T thing that I have to unpack and look. No, sometimes you don't know what you don't know until you're willing to check in with yourself about what you think, feel, and believe. And that's why narrative interventions are a thing that I use a lot. So earlier I'd asked you, what's the story that you're telling yourself when this thing, because we're all narrative creatures, right? Because again, emotion becomes a feeling when we attach a narrative to it. We're narrative creatures because that's how we make sense of the world, is in sequential events through a logical, cohesive narrative thread. That's how we process and understand the world. That becomes unhelpful when your body is trying to process something that your mind really has no business mucking in. So like when we have emotional responses, we don't necessarily need to have narratives that are attached to it. So if somebody says something, really awful to you, you don't have to sit there and talk about why they should or shouldn't have said it internally to yourself. Just letting yourself sit in that moment of, wow, this person said something really shitty and that feels bad, allows that to dissipate a lot faster than attaching a narrative and trying to process why that happened. And when people start doing this, when people really start witnessing themselves on a physical level instead of getting caught up in the cognitive process, and to be clear, this is not something that people typically do the first, the fifth, or the 15th time. This is, you got to try and fail a lot with this. But when people get to that point where they're able to just feel in the genuine sense from a somatic orientation, there's no, cognitive narrative attached to that. Sometimes folks feel crazy. and it happened for me because there would be times where I would feel like I was about to start crying for no discernible reason. And normally I would engage the narrative. Why do I want to cry? And then I would find a sad thing and then cry. At this point, if there's an emotion that starts welling up inside of me, I just stay with it. And what happens is that most of the time it evaporates as quickly as it showed up. Because if you're not clinging to it, you're not holding on to it, you're not trying to, turn its pockets out and ask it for $5 and then go to dinner. Like, if you're not doing anything to make it stay, then why will it? And part of that wisdom is learning how to lean into the experience of something for the sake of experiencing it, versus when is there a nugget that needs a narrative? When is there a lesson? When is there something that's coming out of this experience that does require, an organizing theme to make sense of what happened? But that's something that everybody has to learn for themselves. Like I tell clients I would love to be a mental health technician instead of a clinician, because I would love to be able to crack people's heads open in a non-murder way. Like get into people's domes, flip a switch, put in a patch, redo some wiring, slap you shut. And I'd have a new caseload every 2 weeks, man. Like I would love to be able to do that. But I can't. That's an internal discernment and a sensitivity and a change that people have to facilitate within themselves. And again, as I've said multiple times before, a lot of it comes down to, are you willing to face the grief of what you've been through? Are you willing to accept that you most likely are not going to get justice for this? And are you willing to become somebody that is totally outside of your current self-conception? And those sound like terrifying fucking questions to most people. I get that.
Right. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
As somebody who has done that and is doing it and will do their best to try to continue to choose that, I can very confidently and wholeheartedly and full-throatedly say that it is one of the best decisions that I have ever made for myself, hands down. Life gets so much richer when you are willing to experience all of it. That doesn't mean, that I love the tragedies that have happened in my life, right? Going back to contextually based reality, I can't know how good things are without also knowing how shitty they can be sometimes.
Yeah, dude. Goddamn, I gotta remember to clip that.
Don't worry, you're gonna be listening later. You can just put in like little tabs, and I'm sure you can make a compilation at this point. So
yeah. So much clip potential in this podcast. Which breaks my heart to say, man. I'm gonna have to put a bow on this. Believe it or not, you and I have done 3 hours.
Damn,
and
it doesn't feel that way at all. I don't know if it does for you, and I'm sorry if it does, but it does not feel that way.
It doesn't, and that's the crazy thing about time. Time is really just an illusion, because people say that often, especially when I have very lengthy podcasts, because I try to keep it within 90 minutes, because I've had 2-hour podcasts, I've had 3-hour podcasts, and yeah, I mean, honestly, I always tell people, because new guests are like, ooh, my mic is going down. When new guests are like, oh, like how long, how long is this gonna be? And it's like honestly, like it just depends how great the conversation is going because I mean I hate to say it, but like if the podcast is short, not that it's their fault, but it's like it's probably just that's because there wasn't anything else that was coming out of the experience, I would have to say.
Yeah.
But man, when there's when there's a great interaction like this one, it's like, yeah.
Well, if I can spoil you for options and choices, then I feel good. So
Yeah, you're gonna make the reviewing and editing process harder. Actually, not harder, just lengthier because like it's just so much juiciness in this podcast. So I want to say before we start getting, I have a couple things to get into before we
yeah,
really put a bow on it. But I
yeah,
want to say right now, I really appreciate your time.
absolutely.
It's been awesome and. Um, I will make it a real intention to I'll come out to you and so we can like have a time together, have a drink or a meal, whatever it is. I'll
Absolutely.
make a day out of the visit and just to really have a good hang.
Yeah, y'all are welcome to come. Absolutely. Or I mean, Charlottesville's also halfway. And then again, for vendor season, I'll be in and around. So I'm sure we
Well,
will cross
well,
paths,
well, now like I'm opening my home to you, so
which
like you
I
don't have
appreciate.
to worry about the commute, especially if you're doing back-to-back events. Just hit me up, man. Just let me know. As long as I don't have anything planned, like any family engagements,
Yeah,
we'll have the bed set for you.
appreciate that, man.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure. So I wanted to, I want to bring this kind of segment back into the show, although it's
Hmm.
just been tough to have volunteers for it.
Yeah.
Oh, I asked, I mean, I told you this. I on Instagram,
Hmm.
I posted asking people if they have any questions regarding art or therapy,
Yeah.
to submit in the box. And
Hmm.
we did have one submission,
Okay.
one question, and this one's quite a loaded question, really.
Okay.
And the question is, what do you like most about art? Yeah,
Mm.
I know.
That is a question. God.
And I'll even say I'll add this a little bit. This was from a follower of yours.
Hmm. Um. Oof. I feel like people who are not self-identified creatives are going to hear this question and be like, "That's an easy question. What do you mean you can't just like pick your favorite?" No, the best response that I'm able to formulate right now is the synergistic compounding effect that it has.
Ooh, fuck.
Because what I mean by that is that art is not singular, right? There's not one way to do it. There is not one way to express it. There is not one way to receive it. It's really something that feeds off of itself, off of other people, other ideas, and so that's the synergy is it's buzzing with everything around it, and that compounding effect is that the more layers that you add to something, especially fine detail art or anything like that, like the more nuanced that you're capable of making something, the more that deepens the experience. And I'm gonna say something that might sound like I'm splitting hairs here, but a conclusion that I've arrived at recently is that I think that complexity is really just nuance to the untrained eye. And what I mean by that is that I feel like a lot of times when people say something is complicated, it's done in a really reductive and dismissive kind of way. Whereas when you recognize that something has nuance, that is recognizing that there are sometimes, contradictory or conflicting elements that are present in something that have a unique contribution to whatever that might be. So shit's only complicated when you're not willing to look at the nuance, when you're not really willing to look at and identify the unique individual elements that are comprising something that's really multifaceted and nuanced instead of complicated. But that's just me and my moral high ground that I stand on. People are welcome to disagree, but it's something that I've sort of been meditating on for myself lately, is that complication is just nuance to the untrained eye.
Fuck. That is such a much better answer than what I had in mind. I mean, it's my response is similar, but God damn, see, this is what I'm saying, bro. Your vocabulary is just like levels, people, levels to this whole thing. No, I agree with you. 1000%. You said it in such an intellectual way. Damn it.
I'm sorry.
No, don't be sorry. Don't be sorry. My reaction is really just an admiration and a little bit of a self-disappointment because I'm like, I wish I was able to like respond eloquently and intellectually as you have. But yes, that my initial response was that what I love about art the most is that there really is essentially there are no rules to art, you know?
I love it when people try to put rules on art.
Yeah.
Like
There's
I'm not going to name any artists by name, but there are a couple people who have a very stigmatizing style. I'll send you their info in your Insta DMs. But these are people that make art that some people are convinced. Let me just put it this way: there are people who are convinced that there are people who are making what they view as "quote unquote" intentionally bad art, and then are getting a lot of popularity because of it. And there's the artist being like, no, this is my style, this is what I do, and other people being like, no, this is a ripoff and this is a scam. And some people are being like, no, this is great social commentary. Like no one really knows what the impetus is or the creation point for this particular genre that seems to emerge, because there's one guy that was doing this unique style and apparently a couple of other people have started doing quote unquote bad art with him or like in a similar style. And it's funny how people will be like, this is an insult to my art degree. And I spent all there's a part of, again, it goes back to, the therapist in me is like, okay, so clearly you've not validated something about your own experience. Like somewhere along the line, somebody told you that being an artist wasn't legitimate. So that's why you went to this really prestigious art school, because that's the only way to be a capital A artist is if you go to an art school and learn all of these things. And what I return to a lot is that I forget who it was. This is it's a famous painter, but he was known for realism and then spent his whole life trying to work backwards from that. He was like, no, when I was a kid, my art was a whole lot better and had a deep I want to say it was Van Gogh, maybe. I can't remember.
Well, was it see, I always say I'm the worst artist because like I should be like well versed with. I was gonna say I think it was Picasso, but I think he was going through like health shit. I think like as he was getting older and getting through life, his quality of art was sort of degrading a bit because he used to do a lot of, you know, still life and stuff like that. But then he started going through different stages of his creativity where started becoming abstract. And he had like what they called the blue series or the blue age. So like yeah, but I mean, yeah, like there are no rules. There may be different techniques, different skill sets.
Color theory and use of light. Like if you're going to quantify anything that's worth learning, it's those two. How to use light and how to mix colors. That how to do those two things, you can make anything.
Yeah, exactly. So like yeah, that's the beauty of art, is that there are no rules to it. And also what you said very intellectually with large big words is the kind of like the like the impact that the art can have on people, the emotions, the feelings, the reactions it can invoke on the viewer. It's a beautiful thing. And so that's my response. Goddamn, fucking Alistair over here. Goddamn.
Listen, man,
I'm gonna have to clip that too.
You don't need to feel bad. No, there's no. I mean, and this is the thing is that like I I guess to kind of name this, if you're wondering why I'm good at talking, for lack of a better phrase, I've been haunted most of my life with a deep-seated feeling of misunderstanding
Mm.
for a lot of different reasons, and I think that that's almost universal for a lot of people. We don't feel
Yeah.
understood, in one way or the other. And the irony of this lesson being taught to me was not lost on me. There was something that one of my math teachers said to me, which was arguably my most difficult subject in school. My brain does not do numbers. Letters, very well. Numbers, no go. No bueno, no funcion. It's not good at all. But he was a really bad math teacher. But he said to me, part of being a teacher is that I need to be able to say the same thing 5 different ways, because not everybody is going to understand what I say the first time. And a lot of what I do as a therapist is actually teaching people. It's the term that we use in billing for insurance is called psychoeducation. No, we're not teaching you to be a psychopath. It's psychological education. So it's, hey, here are your neurotransmitters. Here's your nervous system. So like the polyvagal nerve, like vagus nerve stuff that I was talking about earlier, that's technically considered psychoeducation. I have to be able to be accessible to a lot of different types of people. And I've got to be able to communicate really nuanced ideas in very simplistic, essential. And when I say essential, I mean it in terms of like distilling down to essence, like that actual meaning of that word, that the essential spirit of what something is, which is why I really love, I don't know if it's like an axiom or an idiom or the sentiment that like, if you can't explain it to a 4-year-old, then you don't understand it. I am a really big fan of that. And that's where I think that, again, nuance is part of the conversation, because I think to demonstrate a basic understanding of something, you need to have that 4-year-old level. Nuance is for adults, right?
Yeah.
But for me, it's if you can distill something down to that essential foundational thing that it is right at the heart of the matter, if that's what you can communicate to people, the flair that goes with that doesn't really matter. It's more of how that matches people's communication style. So don't feel like this is some massive social deficit. It's literally my job to talk to people like all day. I've been doing this for a long time, and as a person, like I said, that I've struggled with that sense of understanding. For me, it's that how do I find that ability to be understood? Spoiler alert, comes from within. Not to be super cheesy, but it always comes from inside. So it's a skill. Like everything, like drawing, painting, art is a skill. Communication is a skill. And I would actually argue that living is also a skill too. But because we're not willing to give them the credence that they deserve, give them the gravity and the respect, for being what they are, I think that's why a lot of people sell themselves short.
Yeah, I mean, the best I can do to make up for my vocabulary is just like you mentioned flair. Like that's where like my personality comes in to like act out or
No, that's your thing. That's the word of G, man. Like it's different. The word of G is different than the word of Alistaire. Like it's different, man. It's just different.
The word of G. Oh, it's amazing. Well, to the person that submitted that question, thank you. And I mean, it's a loaded question, but it is a great question and something that will, always bring out a great discussion on. So
I think that should be a regular question for like, as if I can give some unsolicited feedback for future episodes of Rated G, I would say that there's some shows have like a signature question thing. Like I forget Lewis Howes does his like 3 truths thing. So that could be the what do you love about art? That could be your your series question.
I am actively putting that in my notes now because I have like I usually do have a list of like key questions, very generic questions. So yeah, this is certainly added on to that. But yeah, so to put a ribbon on this amazing podcast, I'm gonna end it with this segment where I like to provide one or two meaningful quotes from usually people that I admire. I originally had one, but then just our conversation, something that we were talking about earlier, kind of sparked another quote that I wanted to bring up. Both quotes coming from the same person, a writer named Stephen Pressfield. He's an author of this book that I'm a fan of. It's called The War of Art. Are you familiar of it?
Yes, that's on my reading list.
Okay. It's a great book, part of a trilogy, you could say, because there are other books that follow it. Um, but the first quote I want to share, because this is something that what you were talking about earlier, kind of relating to like sort of, well, this alluded to imposter syndrome, but there was something that you said that really struck this quote in mind, and it's it says, if you find yourself asking yourself and your friends, am I really a writer? Am I really an artist? Chances are you are. The counterfeit innovator is widely self-confident. The real one is sacred to death.
I'm gonna
And
hop in because this ties in with narcissism. I can't tell you, like, this is the tie-in, okay? I can't tell you the number of people that come in and are like, I'm so scared that I'm a narcissist. I'm so afraid that I'm this horrible, self-absorbed person. And I'm like, honey, boo-boo, by virtue of being afraid that that's who you are, you have largely disqualified yourself from being that type of human.
yeah.
So that hits real big for me because people are always afraid of being something, not just something that they're not, but like I'm thinking specifically with like my developmental trauma folks. If you grow up in a house with a narcissist, your greatest fear is that you are one. And I call it narcissistic lycanthropy. People are afraid that if they actually feel good about themselves, they're suddenly going to wolf out and turn into a narcissist that has this massive head. But
Mm,
it's that little kid extremist. I either hate myself and am self effacing, and that's how I don't be this person, or if I feel good about myself, then I'm a narcissist.
mm,
And it's like, no, you can feel good about yourself because narcissists don't feel good about themselves. That's why they have to talk such a big game about who they are because they hate themselves. That's
mm,
why they're that way. So the fact that people have that awareness of, I don't want to take up the space, I don't want to be these things, that doesn't mean that we're not, because everybody has traits of things from time to time. Said another way, just because you have the color on your palette doesn't mean that the whole painting is going to be that tone, right?
mhm,
Everybody's got darker shades, everybody's got the neons, the lights, the pastels, but that doesn't mean that that's the entirety of who you are. Little bits of that can accent and actually make things really beautiful. From a music perspective, I love a diminished third or a diminished ninth, a little bit of dissonance in a chord, right? Something that doesn't actually go with that musical structure makes it beautiful. But
mhm,
yes, that hit real big for me with that, if you're asking yourself, if am I really this thing that you are, because the counterfeits don't ask.
mhm,
For mental health, the narcissists don't ask. The narcissists are not worried that they're narcissists. They
mhm.
don't. They think that they're God's gift to whatever.
Yeah.
It's the real genuine people that are afraid of being these monsters, and it's like, no, that's not you. You
Mm,
just disqualified yourself. But that's what that hit on. So I was like,
mm.
oh, big same.
Awesome. Wonderful. And so this last one is our job in this life is not to shape ourselves into some ideal we imagine we ought to be, but to find out who we already are and become it.
Uh, yeah,
Heavy.
that's good.
Yeah.
Deep. I like that. Well,
It's
it's that whole become what you are. Like that's it's they talk about this in psychedelics too, where they say that the first half of your life is learning how to be somebody, and the second half of your life is unlearning how to be that person.
Mhm.
Because we strive so hard for the sense of individuality to get to the point of recognizing that individuality isn't the whole story. Right? It goes back to context. Because how can you be an individual without also being part of a collective? How could you have a collective without an individual?
Right.
And it's finding, how do we strike those balances within ourselves? How do we hold on to the fact that, yeah, we are a totally original, unique manifestation, the likes of which the universe has never, ever seen before. And the fact that if I personally, God forbid, something happened to me after this podcast and I died, life as an institution is going to keep on rolling.
That's very
So how do we both touch that deep-seated sense of purpose and meaning and belonging, and also touch the fact that on a certain level we don't matter? How do we embrace our gravity and our importance, and also the inconsequential nature of who we are? And how do we hold both of those with an equal level of reverence and respect? Because both are true. We are entirely unique and incredibly special, and dime a dozen. Those are
mm,
not mutually exclusive. They are two sides of the same coin.
absolutely. Man, well said. Well, there you have it, folks. Holy shit.
I'm sorry, slash, you're welcome. I keep saying I'm going to make a T-shirt that has that. Just like, I'm sorry, slash, you're welcome.
do it. You can add your artistic flair to it as well. It'll be awesome. Is there anything you want to plug, like events for any local audience members?
Oof. I haven't actually signed up yet. I'm
Okay.
getting ready for vendor season.
Since you're gonna be applying to events, the least we can do is plug your Instagram. Let people know that you do have an Instagram page that does display your art.
Yep.
So for our listeners, for our viewers, if you have Instagram, which would be surprising if you didn't, but if you do, please visit Alistaire's art page. It's Art by Alistaire, all in one word. And yeah, just check out his art. He's got a lot of great stuff. I'm sorry we didn't really dive deep on it. We got so
It's all good, man. I do it's therapy, art, all of them, everything psychedelic. It's all a part of who I am as a person, right? And also, depending on how it goes, it just means I can come back, right? Like,
oh no, you're absolutely because there's so many other things I wanted to pick your brain about. So you're coming back.
Yeah. So listen, we got plenty of time, man. Like it ain't no rush, ain't no thing.
I mean, yeah. So yeah. So for everyone tuning in. I just want to say thank you for joining us. If you haven't already, please like, follow, subscribe, ring the notification bell so you can keep up with the new uploads. Also to help out with the algorithm and the growth of the podcast, please leave comments if anything came to mind during this podcast. If you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them. Perhaps on the next podcast. But yeah, and follow the social media links in the description below. Come find us, join us on our journey. And yeah, any last words, Alistaire?
Please be kind to yourself. Please make positive life choices. And please remember that there is precious little that you are not able to overcome. It really just becomes a matter of deciding that you want it more than you're scared of it.
Oh my goodness. Goddamn, this guy with the eloquently said statements. So as I usually close the podcast, everyone out there, stay safe, stay healthy, and stay driven, and we shall catch you on the next one. Peace out.